Here's the thing. I want everybody to say it along with me. It's an exercise in camaraderie. We're going to unite the masses and the people of Indianapolis. And for those of you that are listening around the world, if you're watching on the YouTube page, the break room.
You going to smile for the camera? You got to set the tone.
If we going to dim the lights here, let me light a candle.
I can if you'd like.
I would like for everybody to say it with me. I'll say it one time, and then I need you to say it after me. You ready?
I'm ready.
Hail, hail to old Purdue.
Hail to old blank.
Hail to the old gold and black.
I thought it was black and gold.
Hail, hail to old Purdue. Hail, hail to the old gold and black. Isn't that right?
I don't know. I don't know the Purdue's song.
Yeah, because it's old gold.
Yeah.
Is the color. But nonetheless, for you Boilermaker fans, for those of you who are maybe not even an Indiana fan or a Purdue fan, but you root for Purdue because you tire of hearing of Indiana. For you Pacer fans, for all of you, hail to Purdue for carrying their weight last night and actually executing in the game of basketball. Hail to Purdue for going on the road and not leaving their game at home. Hail to Braden Smith, who once again continues to show. I remember when Braden Smith was at Westfield High School. And I can't even remember, truth be told, what player it was that Indiana was recruiting and was gaga about. And I was talking to somebody that follows high school basketball more closely than, do I, that said, look, the best player in the state is Braden Smith. And obviously, I mean, he's Mr. Basketball, right? And they said, people are going to say he's too short. People are going to say he's too slow, whatever. I'm telling you, this dude wins games. This guy is a flat-out winner. This is a guy that you watch. He's going to go to Purdue, and that guy's going to be a great player. Braden Smith last night, and Trey Kaufman-Wren got Purdue off on the right foot. And I said yesterday, nothing about Iowa jumps out at you. There's nothing about Iowa when you think about going to, two things are going to happen. You know the crowd's probably going to be pretty loud, and you know that at some point, like, Fran McCaffrey is going to look like a caricature of, like, a fire hydrant that's about to completely, like, just let loose, right? Beat red in the face, whatever.
Look like Ryan Day.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? What's Ryan Day got going on with it? He has an issue, right, with the cheeks?
Possibly.
Did you see a video somebody put out the other day of Ryan Day taking batting practice with the Ohio State softball team?
Did you see that run?
Ryan Day runs. What is with that?
It's like he's prancing.
Did he? And I should know this. Was Ryan Day a football player? I would imagine he was, right? Because when I watched him run, prancing is a good way of saying it. It was a very non-athletic run.
He attended Manchester High School. Quarterback and defensive back. And he was the state's Gatorade Player of the Year his senior season.
So, yeah, he played football. I mean,
And then went on to play at the University of New Hampshire.
Obviously, he went somewhere that threw the ball a lot and didn't have to necessarily run out of the pocket.
And played for Chip Kelly.
Did not know that. Okay. That makes sense then. Chip Kelly, who's leaving Ohio State, by the way. But back to the issue at hand. Braden Smith last night, Trey Kaufman-Wren, and this is what Purdue does so well. You know, I was watching yesterday a game in which, from many, when the game was more simple, okay? I was working out, and I was watching a video, and I was watching a game from many moons ago, like from the 80s, a basketball game. I know that's weird. And they were talking about the two different styles of play. And Billy Packer was saying, the thing that you see this team do as well as anybody in college basketball, he would always say that about teams. They do this as well as anybody in college basketball. He was talking about teams knowing every player on the team, knowing specifically what their role is and never exceeding that role. The one thing that you have to think about, and you see this at the NBA level, you go to an NBA game, and I always say this, you pick any team in the NBA, and you're sitting there watching it, and some guy checks in for 7 minutes, and you look at it, and you're like, I barely remember this guy. He played at VCU. He's a shooting guard, whatever. He's averaging 11 minutes a game in the NBA and 6.5 points, and he's making $8 million a year. Every guy on that floor is, I mean, unless obviously they happen to go to a high school that's a power, but every guy that you're seeing in the NBA is a guy that every step of their career, they are the greatest player in the history of wherever they played. Every single guy in the NBA, you look at somebody that is like the 11th man off a bench or a role player, Isaiah Jackson for the Pacers. Right now, there are two guys having lunch somewhere in the Detroit area that are still telling stories about the time that they had to play Isaiah Jackson in high school. And everybody's like, seriously? He's like, yeah, that dude was a beast. He's the best I've ever seen. Every player in the NBA, that's the case. But at some point, when you get into the NBA, you have defined roles within your team, even at the NBA level, and you know what your role is. And your role becomes you are a screener or you are a distributor or whatever it may be. You know, you're a rebounder. Some guys, their role is to simply score. What Purdue does as well as anybody in college basketball, Billy Packer, is they have two players in Trey Kaufman-Renn and Braden Smith, and then obviously a third in Fletcher Lawyer that's kind of the floating around amoeba, if you will. But they establish one of those two, and then the other feeds off that for the rest of the game. And last night for Purdue, Trey Kaufman-Renn got them going early, and then Braden Smith said, I'm going to show you why I'm a winner and the best point guard in college basketball. He goes 11 of 15 from the floor. He's 5 of 7 from three-point range. He's on the floor for every minute of the game. I think he might have sat out 1 minute. Ends up with 31, and Purdue gets an impressive win at Iowa that, as I said going in yesterday, Eddie, you go into that game, and Iowa, it feels like it can kind of be a trap game because Iowa never blows you away, but it is a tricky place to play.
That, and they're always one of those teams where they get streaky. Like,
totally.
If they're hot, they're hot. Or if they're cold, they're cold. If they're knocking down threes, they're hard to beat. For the first half, they were knocking down threes, but Purdue was able to stay in there because of Trey Kaufman-Renn.
Now, speaking of streaky and when they're hot, they're hot. Let me tell you about a weird thing that happens within. Now, let me ask you this, Eddie. So I watched 90% of my television viewing at Shannon's house. We did not live together, right?
Uh-huh.
But I'm over there, and that's where I watch television. And she's one of these people that, like, everything's about, like, she's got to have, like, the big, huge, like, theater-sized screen and all the bells and whistles and every app and everything else, right?
Okay.
Which is wonderful. So can I say the Jake Shannon household? Is that, I probably can't go there, right? Is that too much?
No, it's the Kobe household.
Kobe's the dog. So at the Kobe household.
And I forget the other dogs' names, or I would have included them in it.
Oh, that's Charlie and Joey.
Okay.
So in said household, the TV is wonderful, except for, and it appears as though we're in the anomaly here, but going from television to app viewing takes like 15 seconds. So you go from, I'm watching the Purdue game, although Purdue was on Peacock also, but I had gone away because I was checking in on what time the Pacer game started. So I'm on the FanDuel regular channel. Then I go to the app. And when I do that, and I know that it's probably just because it's the TV's like 2 years old or whatever, but there's like a delay, like a 15-second delay while the app is like theoretically warming up. And in that time frame, it's as though the channels where I could find the Pacer games and regular television, that was Wisconsin. It was boom, boom, boom. Like you push the button and you're going from one channel to the next. No problem. Let's go. Then you go over to the app side of it to get the app to come up on your television. That was Indiana. Taking a little while to get going. And then once it came up, then all of a sudden you have to say, do you want to watch this show or do you want to watch this show? Do you want to watch Peacock Live or do you want to watch a replay of the USC-Oregon game from 2 weeks ago? Whatever. And then, I want this. And then I get Spinning Glass again. And then, boom, finally it comes up. And bada boom, bada bang, Indiana's down like 26-4. And I realized that's only because it took 40 seconds for the screen to load. And 40 seconds ago, it was like probably 4-2. But Wisconsin gets out to this massive start. They hit threes from everywhere. And look, sometimes that happens. But here's the thing where enough is enough. Indiana going into that game, you look at Purdue. Everybody on Purdue's roster knows their role. Everybody, they do it as well as anybody in college basketball. Billy Packer. Purdue has an inside-outside game that they establish. They take whichever one is they are able to exploit because a defensive team is trying to take away the other. And then if both are taken away, no problem. Then they have players who know their role. Fletcher Lawyer to knock down an open three on the wing. You know, Caleb First to stay active as he was yesterday, very much so, and get himself to the free throw line and continue to draw defense away a little bit from Kaufman Wren to wither away at that. They all know their role. Indiana, you watched that game, and you knew one thing. Okay, Wisconsin is hitting everything from the outside, and you've dug yourself a huge hole. Your temptation now is to start just chucking threes from all over the place. But what is your offensive bread and butter? You've got a guy in Umar Ballo that is bigger than everybody on the floor, that has low post moves. He got 3 touches. He got 3 shots last night. 3. Indiana made, theoretically, no adjustments. They couldn't get anybody going. They did zero, seemingly, job or adjustment in coming out and rotating defensively on the outside and taking away Wisconsin's perimeter shooting. They did zero, theoretically, to rotate their own basketball and get good out. Sure, I get it. McKenzie and Bacco got a couple of looks from 3. Okay. But were they good looks? Were they really good looks? They had, again, a circumstance in a situation where somebody comes in. Like at one point, Bryson Tucker has, and I know that he claims he was going for the ball, but like he gets called for a flagrant, and then like Luke Goody comes over to calm him down. And Luke Goody, by the way, seems to be the one guy on Indiana's team that has a wherewithal to know how to like read the room and kind of lead on the floor of like, guys, we got to do this or that. He's like the only one that does, theoretically. But he goes over to try to calm down Bryson Tucker, and then I'm like, wait, are these guys like arguing with each other? This team in Indiana, and maybe it's the way that they were improperly constructed. Maybe it's the issue of NIL. Maybe it's that they are still wearing name tags because most of them were not a part of the program a year ago, and so they're all getting to know one another. But whatever it may be, that is as non-cohesive, non-playing together, as well as anybody in college basketball group as you can see anywhere. They look like guys that literally are playing at the hyper and are just kind of like, I got a feeling that guy looks like a good shooter. I'll spot him up every once in a while. But there's just no cohesiveness. There seemingly is. I know there's got to be a game plan, but I'm not sure what it is. They never adjusted defensively. They let Wisconsin, they never got within, they did at one point get it within obviously they only lost by 12 and they were down 20 2 minutes into the game. But they never, once they got like within the double-digit range, Wisconsin would just come back, hit a 3, fairly uncontested. And I think the thing that most frustrates me and the thing that I find the most alarming, you watch any team in college basketball, any of them, UTEP, New Mexico State, Niagara, Virginia Tech, whoever. When a team is getting run out of a building, usually at some point you see a coach take a timeout and they pan over to the sidelines and immediately the coach is grabbing some dry erase board and he's erasing it. And he's sitting everybody down, and he looks over at each one of them individually for a second like he's challenging them. And then you see him drawing something up or showing something or teaching or giving a lesson. And I don't know Mike Woodson personally. none of this is an attack on Mike Woodson as a human being or a man, but as a basketball coach, seemingly every single time Indiana gets in a hole or Indiana gets behind or a team is making a run or Indiana has to call a timeout and they show the sidelines, he's just standing there. I don't see any instruction. I don't see any coaching. I don't see any teaching. And certainly when they come out of huddles, I don't see any adjustments. It literally looks like a ship taking on water, and they're not even rearranging the chairs on the deck because no one knows what to do. I don't know how to explain it, except for to say this. And I think people misunderstand. People think that when you say something on the radio that it means you're demanding it, or people think that when you say something on the radio it means that you are hoping for it. Neither of those things are true, but it is very, very apparent, and I'm stating Mr. Obvious. I'm actually, what I'm about to state, I'm stating as well as anybody in college basketball, Billy Packer. Indiana cannot go on next year. There's no way that they can run this back. I don't know that last night was going to have any impact on what was going to happen moving forward. But the house of horrors that is Wisconsin, the last time they won there, Ryan pointed this out last night on social media. It's a great point. I'm not going to say it's been a while since Indiana's won at Wisconsin, but the last coach that they beat in Madison, that guy's son since then has lost to a 16 seed as a 1 seed in the tournament, won a national championship, and retired since then. And his dad was the coach. It's been that long. So it's a house of horrors anyway, and you knew going into it that Indiana potentially was going to get run at Wisconsin. And no one had any doubt 5 minutes into that game what the end result was going to be. And they get run against Wisconsin. They get blown out of the building. They get completely humiliated and embarrassed again. And now you've got to go home and play Michigan and see on the other sidelines a guy who went to Indiana, who worked for the Indiana basketball program, who wore the red shorts, yes, as a manager, not a player, who's from Indiana and is coaching at a Big Ten school. Lest I remind you, February of 2006, when Indiana had lost, I think, 4 or 5 going into a home game against Iowa, and Steve Alford, who had played at Indiana, who had worn the shorts, who was from Indiana and was coaching at a rival Big Ten school, and there was all this murmuring of that's the guy that needs to be coaching. And Mike Davis, who was put in the most thankless, difficult position in the history of college basketball, Billy Packer. But Mike Davis, who I think Indiana, honestly, there should be a statue of Mike Davis outside of Cook Hall, and I really do truly mean that. Because regardless of what you say about the end result for Mike Davis, I think given the most difficult of circumstances, Mike Davis conducted himself throughout all of it, with the exception of when he won on the floor in Freedom Hall in Louisville. Mike Davis was a true sportsman gentleman with everything and all the BS he had to put up with at Indiana. And I think the world of him. I do. I have my issues with him when he was coaching, personally and professionally. But, bygones are bygones. And I think the world of not only as I've gotten away from it, seeing what he had to put up with and the things that he went through, Mike Davis deserves every bit of flower that Indiana ever wants to give him. But in that moment in 2006, when Alford was coming in and the heat was on Davis, Mike Davis missed that game because he was ill that morning. And Tim Garrell said, Coach Davis felt ill this morning, and he would not be. He needs not to be around the team or in the arena at all. Who knows? Who knows if that was a Cal Ripken power outage at Camden Yards game or whether he was really sick? Who knows? But either way, it's going to be tough for Mike Woodson on the floor with Michigan and Dusty May on the other sideline, because you already have students that have been chanting about Mike Woodson being fired, both at home and on the road for their games. So are they going to start chanting for Dusty May? Are we going to see people in Assembly Hall cheering for Dusty May in Michigan? Unfathomable, right? But the atmosphere is going to be interesting. Then you have the atmosphere in Portland. So I watched the Pacer or the Indiana game, and I'm thinking, okay, well, the good news is the Pacers are playing well, and they're in Portland, another place where, as Eddie pointed out yesterday, they have not won in front of visiting fans since 2007. And so I flipped that over, and now, Eddie, what did I say? Who was the player that did the on-floor interview that was super elated, that hit a huge shot for them to win at Utah and kind of skipped off the court with the signature grin and said, like, let's go to Portland, let's get another one?
It would be the same. It would be the guy that took the same amount of shots as Zumar Ballo.
It is a mystery to me sometimes why there are games where still, and this is the one thing holding back, Tyrese Halliburton is a phenomenal player, and he's a franchise player. I get it. But still, the one thing that seemingly holds him back from being, in the eyes of a lot of people, I think, like literally the only missing link still to his game is the fact that he has games off. And I'm not saying he takes them off, but his mentality just seems to he takes 3 shots, goes scoreless, and they get blown out. And they were kind of hanging around for a while there. But you cannot win games when the guy that is your max contract player takes no shots, takes 0 shots.
He takes one more shot than you and me, Jake, from the second quarter to the fourth quarter.
And he made the same amount.
Yes.
0 for 1 from 3, 0 for 3 from the floor. He had 6 assists, okay. But so much of back to Braden Smith. Back to the way Purdue does it. Braden Smith can allow others to get involved and then himself utilize that to open things up for himself and start taking shots. And when the shots are there, Braden Smith's going to find a way to get them done. He knows what his role is, and his role is to both combination facilitate, but as I've mentioned, facilitate based on softening defenses because of his own aggression offensively. And Tyrese Halliburton, that's the one thing that still in his game to me lacks. And the fact that Halliburton, I think, still at times tries to facilitate but doesn't understand the importance of his own night-in, night-out aggression to allow that facilitation. I mean, Nembhard had a good game. Thank goodness Nembhard's mid-range game is as good as anybody. But it was an off, and you get your typical T.J. McConnell. But it was an off night. No question about it. It was an off night for them. And so I realized that even though I went back to watching the Pacers on the regular channel, it was almost like I was watching it on the app because it was just slow spin circle for everything to develop. And then when it did, I was thinking to myself, was this worth it? And then I felt for you, Eddie, because I thought to myself, well, poor Eduardo's got to be running the board, producing the Pacer game. You look like a zombie today.
Thank you.
Do you need some of the chai tea?
I need more than just chai tea.
Really? Would you like to elaborate?
No.
You know the other thing.
A shot of adrenaline?
Okay. A shot of adrenaline. We'll see what we can do for you. How's that? I would think, to be honest with you, most people, Eddie, would say that being graced with my presence for 3 hours a day is all the adrenaline most people need, right?
Well, it's only been about an hour so far, so we'll see how this is going, even though we're 30 minutes into the show almost.
You know, I might have a Diet Mountain Dew here. Do you want the Diet Mountain Dew?
That doesn't do me much.
You need actual adrenaline. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. On the program today, by the way, it is National Girls and Women in Sport Day today. And we're going to celebrate that a little bit because we've got a couple of women who are very influential within sports in Central Indiana that are going to join us on the program. One of them, Debbie Antonelli, a friend of the show. And, you know, there's some fever to talk about, obviously, with their roster coming together. In addition to that, she was just honored at her alma mater of North Carolina State, correct?
Yeah, just a couple weeks ago, she went to their Ring of Honor.
I'm a big fan of North Carolina State, actually. Not necessarily athletically. I just always thought they're kind of cool.
Would it be its Ring of Honor? Because we're referring to North Carolina State, right? Not there, because
you would say, well, again, good question. If you are referring to the Ring of Honor itself, it would be singular. But when you're referring to in the university is singular, but if you're thinking about a group of people that put her in it, it would be there. So it just depends on which way you're using it contextually, right?
Okay. That's one always trips me up.
You want to ask her?
I don't think she's
Debbie,
okay.
listen, would you say you're in its Ring of Honor or their Ring of Honor? She's going to join us. Then, Horizon League, by the way, this is what I love about the Horizon League. And Cleveland State is really good in the Horizon League right now, if anybody hasn't noticed from the men's side of things. Obviously, IU Indy men's and women's in the Horizon League, Purdue Fort Wayne in the Horizon League. But the Horizon League being based right down the street from where we are, and their tournament is the entry tournament. It's the gateway tournament every year for the NCAA tournament. It kind of kicks off championship week. That's going to be taking place again in Indianapolis just about a month from now. So, friend of the program, as a matter of fact, I think one of the very first shows that I did with you guys, she came on, right?
The golf outing.
Correct.
Was at the golf outing.
Julie Relash from the Horizon League, who is the commissioner, is going to join us in studio. She's going to be doing that coming up just about an hour from now. So we've got a loaded show for you, but we'll get back into what happened last night, college basketball-wise, and your thoughts as well, including this question, and that is simply, is there a difference between putting together a great meal and the actual ingredients that go into it? In other words, are we looking at two different schools where one of them might have the better ingredients, but the other one has the better chef? I think we both know the answer, but we will get into that on the other side here on a Wednesday. It is Wednesday, right, Eddie?
Yes.
Yesterday I thought it was Wednesday all day. So today I'm a day off.
Yeah, it's Wednesday.
Okay, today's a hump day Wednesday. We have tickets to give away for a concert coming up at White River. That's going to be in the middle of the summer. June 18th, as a matter of fact, I believe is the date for that, but we will do that later in the program on this Wednesday edition of Aquarian Company. I recently saw somebody that ran into somebody from Devo at an airport. These dudes are from, I think, Akron, Ohio, or outside Cleveland. And literally, like 2 months ago, I saw this. Somebody was in an airport, and they ran into the lead singer of Devo, and he was wearing that, like, potted plant thing on his head. He was wearing the hat on his head, just walking around an airport. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it looks like a pyramid almost.
Yeah. I always thought it looked like a flower pot on his head, but yeah. Yeah, he's just walking around. I mean, like, and I always like people like that because then, like, you come up and it's like, yeah, I don't want to bring attention to myself. Okay. You know, like, I was one time, and I'm going to get into my question about ingredients and chefs here in just a second. Mark Janes, the radio play-by-play voice and the chief announcer for the IndyCar Radio Network, he and I were in Long Beach several years ago for the Long Beach Grand Prix, and we're walking down the street, and there was a girl completely dressed like like a bunny rabbit, like the Mad Hatter or whatever from Alice in Wonderland. And she had the big hat. She had on a bunny outfit, but then the big hat, and she was pushing a stroller with an actual live bunny in it.
What?
And so I walked up to her and said, I know this is odd, but is there any way I can take a picture of your rabbit in the stroller here? And the girl said, and I quote, I'd rather you not. I'm not trying to bring attention to myself. Okay. Well,
that's quite ironic, don't you think?
Okay. Well, I'll just let you be and live your life in anonymity. So here is my question for you regarding Indiana and Purdue.
Me or the audience?
The audience.
Okay.
And you as well. Every year that there is an expansion team that comes into a league, you have an expansion draft. I have this weird memory of, like, each time that the Pacers, for example, lost players in the expansion draft. I have a weird memory of certain players that they left unprotected that were a surprise and whatever else. When the Grizzlies and Raptors were coming in the league, and the Magic and the Heat were coming into the league, and it was actually Hornets and Heat at the same time. But at any rate, you obviously, each team has to leave, and the same thing happened with the NFL. When the Houston Texans came into the NFL as an expansion team, the Colts lost Steve McKinney. Steve McKinney was selected. They left him unprotected, and he was drafted to come away. If there was an expansion school, a school that was going to start a basketball program in the Big Ten, and they got to then draft away from the other Big Ten schools, and you had to leave every player unprotected, which school between Indiana and Purdue would lose more players? Which school, in terms of individual players, would programs more like to have on their roster? And this is not a knock on any individual player, but for example, if you were to look, I'm going to give you, Eddie,
kind of like the exercise we did last week with the Colts and their free agents.
Yes, like how many Colts free agents are really coveted elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing about Purdue, and I say this as a complete credit to Purdue, Purdue might have guys actually that would be bigger players if they went elsewhere.
Like
Miles
whom?
Colvin might be getting more minutes if he went elsewhere. You know? Cox might be getting more minutes if he went elsewhere.
Jakari Harris?
Correct, but they know their role. They know what their limit is. The true definition of a team is they know, so long as I'm playing at Purdue, what Matt Painter wants me to do is the following. Whereas Indiana looks like a team that has a bunch of guys that maybe it's not that Indiana has more individual talent individually than Purdue. Maybe it's more so just that Indiana has more players that are playing individually. And that there is, when Indiana plays, it doesn't look like they're running any sort of like designed set of everybody knowing what their role is. Like, what's the role of Trey Galloway? Just to kind of run around and occasionally disrupt a fast break entry pass. He's a decent shooter, kind of streaky. Umar Ballo, I think we know what his role is. Malik Renew, to me, and I know the injury. I get it. But I think about Deron Davis, who was a really good low-post player for Indiana. Then he had a pretty bad injury and just never was the same again. And Renew, for as much as we give Mike Woodson credit, or let me rephrase that, as much as Mike Woodson, I think, gives Mike Woodson credit for the development of Trace Jackson Davis, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Khalil Ware. How much of that was actually under his tutelage, and how much of that, Trace Jackson Davis played the majority of his career under Archie Miller. But either way, those guys, maybe, Jalen Hood-Schifino did develop in Indiana, for sure, right? Only there a year, but he got better as the year went on. But for as much as we want to talk about that, has Malik Renew actually been the opposite? Has he regressed, or is that the injury? Probably the injury. But it feels to me like Indiana may have the better collection of individual talent, but they have zero semblance of team cohesion and understanding of feeding off of one another than does Purdue. And it's a credit to Purdue. Maybe the only reason we think that is because Purdue's players are not getting the opportunity to individually show what they do, because that's not in the best interest of the way Purdue performs. And Purdue right now is as good a program as anybody in the country, and certainly one of the top two, if not the best, year in and year out under Matt Painter in the Big Ten, because everyone knows their role, and their role right now is for Trey Kaufman-Renn and Braden Smith to be the leaders offensively in terms of the way they score, and then obviously for Fletcher Lawyer to complement that when looks come his way and to spread things out a little bit, and he's obviously a great shooter. And yet every player with Purdue, the best way to say it, every time any player on Purdue's roster is touching the basketball, you feel like that right there is part of a Rube Goldberg machine that you're watching, and you know that the next person to touch the basketball, it is by design within a constant movement of what exactly everybody collectively is aiming to do. You feel like when Indiana has the basketball, whoever is touching it more often than not, they know what they want to do with it, and maybe one other dude that he made eye contact with that he's going to pass to if things break down knows what he's going to do with it. But there's no cohesiveness in terms of their offensive flow. They're not moving the ball around quick enough on their perimeter ball movement to get, for example, Mackenzie Mbako, who is a streak shooter, good squared-up looks. They're not getting it into – last night, Umar Ballo gets 3 shots. 3 shots. The guy is somewhere between unmovable object and immovable force, and yet he gets 3 looks. They don't get him the ball. But Indiana feels like a team that has individualized talent, but unfortunately they are playing to the strengths of individuals. Purdue plays to the strengths as a team.
I think part of that is credit to the assistant coaches at Purdue and their ability to get all of these position groups, whether
Totally
it's
agree.
guards, forwards, wings, centers, to buy into what they need to do and help develop them. And over the course of Indiana, that just hasn't happened. Those assistants have not been able to develop any of the players. Like, everyone can point the finger at Mike Woodson because he's the head coach, but at the same time, the assistants are just as much part of this as the head coach is, because they're doing the scouting and they're running the practices, and Woodson's watching it all, and they're in charge of helping these guys get better.
There is a guy living in West Lafayette that's the most underrated at what he does of anybody in the state. There's one guy. I'll tell you who it is on the other side, and then Debbie Antonelli going to join us 1 o'clock, correct, Eddie?
Yes.
All right, 18 minutes from now, Debbie Antonelli joins us. Who is the unheralded secret at Purdue? I'll tell you next. Todd Meyer, our executive producer, makes a pretty good point. He's like, yeah, listen, Jake, you could say that the guy that you're about to mention is an underrated aspect from Purdue, but he's kind of gotten a lot of credit and a lot of flowers lately. So he's not necessarily so underrated anymore. Yeah, there's probably some truth to that.
Don't talk about P.J. Thompson like that, Jake.
I love P.J. Thompson. You know, P.J. Thompson, I was at the Pacer game last year. This is my claim to fame with P.J. Thompson. When Liam McNeely decommitted from Indiana,
yep,
I was at the Pacer game and was standing, literally, I was in the little restaurant area when I saw, like, somebody sent me a message saying that, and I turned around, and P.J. Thompson was standing right next to me. I said, hey, man, did you happen to see this?
Are you taller than him?
Yes. And he was like, oh, my gosh. Yes. P.J. Thompson's like your size.
Really?
Mm-hmm. I mean, less the freakish size head, but yes.
Okay.
So, at any rate, when I was a senior in back in my day, senior year of high school, my graduating class of high school, I've mentioned this several times. I graduated in 1991, which was a stacked all-star team. The Indiana all-star team in 1991, because Glenn Robinson was the Mr. Basketball. Alan Henderson was the runner-up for Mr. Basketball. It was neck and neck all the way until the state finals. Brian Evans was in Terre Haute South, where he was playing. Steve Nicodemus, who played at Michigan State, was on that all-star team. There were a lot of really good players in that era. And, of course, Glenn Robinson then was named Mr. Basketball. Henderson was the runner-up. Henderson had a scheduling conflict with like a national organization through his academic accolades and leadership at Brebeuf. So he could not play in, I believe, either the first or the both of the All-Star games. So Henderson was listed as an All-Star but was not in the games itself. And I believe I'm correct in saying this, no, I take that back. Damon Bethea was the fill-in. Damon Bethea, who I think went to Michigan State, was a fill-in. He was from, like, Elkhart. But Brandon Brantley was on that All-Star team as well and got a lot of time because Henderson wasn't playing. Brandon Brantley, as the bigs coach at Purdue, who is in, I believe, his 12th or 13th year there, it is incredible. And I know that Matt Painter gets a lot of credit in terms of the X's and O's on this, but it is incredible the level of development that Purdue gets. I mean, if you were, it's kind of like Jack Kiefer. If you were a 7-foot high school basketball player in the state of Indiana after Eric Montross had come through Lawrence North, and then you look at, and it is tragic, the coincidence of some of the ill fate, unfortunately, for these young men, all of them. But you look at Montross and what he did at Lawrence North, and then John Stewart ends up playing for Kiefer, and then after John Stewart, of course, Greg Oden, and there were others along the way also that were big guys that had played at Lawrence North. But I just always felt like Kiefer was so good at knowing not only how to showcase those players, but in addition to that, to knowing how to navigate the waters that came with the recruiting enticement, the attention, the spotlight. That was the place to go if you were a 7-footer, frankly, because Kiefer had shown that he knew how to develop players not only at that age in terms of the X's and O's, but the maturation with everything that comes with being a big-time recruit. And for Purdue, if you were a 7-footer at this point, and you forget about Isaac Haas. Isaac Haas was a really good player. Wasn't necessarily when he got to Purdue, but by the time he left, he was a really good player.
Caleb Swanigan?
Caleb Swanigan is a prime example. Again, tragedy, of course, ultimately, but you know, Swanigan, and Swanigan gets a lot of credit for this. I remember going to a Purdue practice and watching a Purdue practice, and Swanigan played the entire practice wearing like underneath his jersey, he had on, it wasn't even a windbreaker. It literally was like a wetsuit windbreaker.
A sweatsuit?
A wetsuit, like a, you know what I mean? Like a, literally designed to keep you warm. And listen, I mean, they had nutritionists and everything else to make sure he was hydrating properly and everything else. But I mean, he was like a moving water fountain because he knew his body type was basically predisposed to be overweight, and he was constantly working on keeping his weight in check. And Swanigan was unbelievable in terms of his not just his quickness off the floor, but in knowing where on the floor he needed to be for every specific rebound, shot, etc. And that, again, Brandon Brantley, Caleb Swanigan gets all the credit in the world for his conditioning when he was at Purdue because he's the one that had to endure all of that. And unfortunately, when he went into the NBA in Portland, it wasn't there. And then we know what happened. Unfortunately, for those that don't know, he passed. And when he passed away, I believe reports were that he was upward close to 600 pounds and had diabetes and everything else. But
Trevion Williams, another one that we failed to mention.
Trevion Williams listen, his ability to pass out of the post. So what you've done here, Eddie, is, in a very good way, is point out big men at Purdue that developed their game in different ways. You know, Isaac Haas developed his game by simply being a back to the basket, low post guy that had touch close to the rim. Zach Edey obviously developed in terms of his ability to get up and down the floor, but also his shooting from beyond just the low post. They didn't utilize that a lot at Purdue, but it clearly is something that he worked on and that was there for his game. Caleb Swanigan was a double-double machine. I mean, a double-double machine. Another guy that was a double-double machine pre-Brandon Brantley's working with him, but Carl Landry was the same way. Just had a knack for knowing where rebounds and angles and all of those kinds of things. Trevion Williams he was such a good low post passer. I thought he might have been their best passer on the roster. But to see that, to recognize it, build off of it, and then you get Matt Harms in the way that they used him. If you were a big player, if you live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and you're a 7-foot high school prospect, why would you not go to Purdue? Honestly, why would you not go to Purdue?
Another name we failed to mention, Jake? A.J. Hammonds.
Was he under Brantley?
He was.
Yeah, he really developed.
He was one of the first bigs I think he worked with.
Brantley would have been after Juwan Johnson, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Hammonds is another one. I mean, what was he, a second-team All-American?
First team.
Was he?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the greatest Purdue athlete from Albuquerque, New Mexico? Anybody?
No.
I'll tell you who it is, and we're also going to go down to the Carolinas because Debbie Antonelli is going to join us next. National Girls and Women in Sports Day. Indianapolis is trying to become the global capital of women's sports. One of those who is spearheading that event going to join us in studio coming up just about 30 minutes from now. Debbie Antonelli also will join us, a prominent voice for women's basketball, basketball in general, but going to join us here in just a couple minutes. By the way, Albuquerque, New Mexico, I had mentioned, which is kind of a cool city if you've never been there. I like Albuquerque. That is the hometown of Purdue great Jim Everett, who came to Purdue in the mid-'80s, of course, and then, earlier than that, the early 80s. Then in the mid-'80s was the Rams quarterback with Eric Dickerson, took them to the NFC Championship game up against the Bears, and then ultimately, I think probably was equally known in his career as a New Orleans Saint. But without knowing other players that might have been from Albuquerque, fairly safe in saying that Jim Everett is the greatest Albuquerque product to play for the Purdue Boilermakers. Joining us now, I believe, on the program, Eddie is still dialing up. Debbie Antonelli going to join us just a couple of minutes from now, and I really want to talk about, the Fever and what they've done, not just in terms of, we're seeing now the Caitlin Clark effect, and I want to know, in terms of the players that the Fever are accumulating, there is obviously somewhat of a challenge in making sure that when you have a player of that level of greatness that you're getting the right kind of players to go around it, because it does take a lot sometimes, I think. We saw last year, resentment's the wrong word, but there are a lot of players that I think with all of the attention on and off the court that Caitlin Clark was getting, there was an adjustment period there. And the Fever have worked a very busy offseason to put pieces around her. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line, of course, analyst for the Indiana Fever broadcast, Debbie Antonelli, and friend of the show, joining us. And Debbie, let's begin with that. When you look at the roster adjustments that the Fever have made now in the offseason, to me, it is very important to get players that also understand, and I don't know how to say this the right way, understand the role of a Caitlin Clark and understanding the dynamic role of what everybody else does. And it looks like that's exactly what they're doing, is putting together pieces that are going to be able to work around what is clearly the centerpiece. Am I overstating the Caitlin Clark effect or impact there?
No, you're not. And first of all, let me tell you, thank you for having me on. It makes me feel like we're getting really close to starting the WNBA season, getting a chance to talk to you. We still have a lot of basketball left in the women's college and men's college space yet, but I think the first thing that you need to acknowledge about the Fever is the fundamental front office changes and why that was important, because Kelly Krauskopf has been a winner, as a previous WNBA champion in 2012, and the franchise went to 2 other title games outside of winning the whole thing in 2012. So she's a proven winner. She's a builder, and I think Mr. Simon understood that getting her in that position back, returning in that position, was going to be a really good way to make Indiana a free agency destination. And it certainly has become that, hasn't it? Because based on what I heard you saying at the end before you brought me on, it was a rough start at the beginning. People didn't understand what I call Clarkonomics and the effect and impact that she's going to have. So I do agree with you that you had to get the right people in place, and I do think they have.
One of those is a familiar face from the beginning of career, but now coming back with a lot more hardware, if you will. Natasha Howard and returning to the Fever. To me, that is the perfect example of, and I don't want to undersell someone, Debbie, by saying role player, but somebody that's going to know exactly what their spot is and what they do to facilitate elsewhere. Tell me what you like or maybe don't like about the acquisition of Natasha Howard.
Oh, I like everything about it, and I like it because Natasha's a winner. She's already won 3 championships. She knows what a winning culture looks like. She knows what comes with the details every day to put yourself in a position to be a winner. And here's what she does on the floor. She finishes around the rim. She rebounds out of her area. She runs ahead of the ball, and she can defend 1 through 4, really 1 through 5. So having that kind of skill set allows you to scheme defensively around that skill set, but it also gives Caitlin Clark another target ahead of the basketball that she knows can finish. And it's a post-up player in a one-on-one that can make a move and a counter. So it's all good for Indiana.
Debbie Antonelli is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Let me ask you one more fever question here, Debbie, and that is, when you look at some of the other moves that have taken place, Kelsey Mitchell and being able to retain her for at minimum here a year, I think was big. But I'm curious about with Sophie Cunningham coming in and Smith going out. How does that change the dynamic or the look, in particular offensively, of what Indiana wants to do?
Well, Sophie Cunningham gives them another spacer on the floor. And if you're going to know anything about Sophie, you could sum it up in one word: competitor. She's got incredible toughness about the way she plays. She played out of position most of last year for Phoenix, playing the 4. She would be a really undersized 4. She won't have to play that. She'll play mostly 2 and 3, and she can guard and can blow up ball screen stuff, and she also can stretch the floor with range. It's another tough competitor that cares about winning. The players that Kelly Krauskopf and her staff brought in free agency for Stephanie White are all competitors. They're going to be great locker room players. They're not going to affect the culture in a negative way, and they're going to help Caitlin and Aaliyah, who are younger players, alongside Kelsey, who's more of a veteran player, play their roles. They understand when you come to a place like Indiana in a free agency situation, you're evaluating the opportunity to win right away. And I think they all see that right now.
Debbie, I thought you were an important voice to have on the show today. Debbie Antonelli, our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, because today is National Girls and Women in Sports Day. Now, we know that you have been honored by North Carolina State. Congratulations recently, within the last couple of weeks, right? Into their, is it Ring of Honor or Hall of Fame? What's the exact terminology?
It's the NC State Athletics Ring of Honor, and my banner is hanging in the rafters at Reynolds. So, yes, thank you, Jake.
I mean, which is tremendous, right? And congratulations on that. And I want to go back to that. When you were a student athlete, with today being National Girls and Women in Sports Day, I'm curious, how is life different? How are opportunities different today for young girls that have athletic dreams than they were, say, when you were at North Carolina State? Where have we come, and where do we still have yet to go?
Oh, my goodness. This is an emotional, powerful question because it's so important. Being on a team is something that you're always going to be a part of, and athletics is one team that you can be on. And as a little girl, you have more options than ever to pick and choose something that you would like to try. That's the best part. I was reading this morning, the NFL is considering flag football for men and women. I mean, that's just absolutely amazing to be a little girl knowing that you have whatever your skill set is, whatever you would like to try, you have the opportunity to do so. We have come a long way. We do have more embracement around women having an opportunity to succeed through sport. I think the girl dad theme is a really cool thing, but the moms have a lot to do with it too, because you're finding, I think it's 80% of the women in C-suites have played sport at some point in their life. It's so important for little girls to have an opportunity to play. We've come a long way. Now we need investment around it. And we're seeing that, like the W is leading the way. The Women's Soccer League is leading the way. We are finding more opportunity to play, more opportunity to aspire at a higher level, and just like the guys. And that's important. I think it's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up today, Jake.
Debbie, when you think about young girls today, and you think about you when you were a young girl, and I want to ask this respectfully, but was there a greater stigma when you were playing that, oh, you're just a tomboy, that kind of thing, you'll outgrow the fact that you want to play sports and et cetera. And now, because there are so many more role models, and as you mentioned, here in Indianapolis, we now have a professional volleyball team, right, which is selling out, and women are playing volleyball and young girls get to see it. Have we torn down that stigma at all?
I think we have. I never hear anybody called a tomboy anymore, and that's what I was called. Tomboy, short hair. You couldn't even tell if you were a boy or a girl sometimes because your hair was short and you played like a guy. I played Little League Baseball growing up when I was 10, 11, and 12, and I know you looked out on the field and you couldn't tell that I was a girl. I'm so grateful that girls don't have to deal with that sort of stigma because it's not about being a girl playing. It's about being an athlete, and that's the way we like to see it. That's the way we like to describe it. It's being an athlete, and you can be feminine and you can be a woman off the floor, but on the floor, you can be a tough competitor, and that shouldn't diminish anything that that you're doing off the court. It's all good, and it's advanced in such a great way. But I will tell you, Jake, when I was 13, I sat on that railing in Reynolds Coliseum, and that's when I learned girls could play basketball in college, and you could get a scholarship to do that. I think little girls are learning that a lot earlier than I did, and we just need to keep it in perspective for why sport is important. It's important to be on a team. It's important for your overall welfare. It's important for young girls to have opportunities, and we're seeing a lot of that now.
Who was your Caitlin Clark? When you were a young girl first watching sports, who was your Caitlin Clark?
So we didn't have any. I watched Larry Bird. That was my player. We just didn't have that. There weren't any opportunities to see. But I will say at NC State, there was a player named Ginger Rouse. She played. I never got to play with her. I did get to play with her sister, but she was probably my favorite player growing up, and that was who I tried to model my game after. But really, you had to see it to believe it back then. Now you see it all over the place.
Okay, Debbie, for somebody right now that is listening that has a daughter that maybe it's a girl dad, right, that has a daughter that is just entering into the world of trying out different sports, and maybe it's a dad that is unsure exactly, how to motivate his daughter because he always thought he'd be playing pitch and catch with his son in the backyard, whatever it might be, or maybe it's a young girl that's listening right now. What is your message to them to allow them to try to become the best version of themselves as a woman who is proud of her athletic skill as she navigates through learning a sport?
My advice to any little girl that would be listening, or any girl, dad, or mom that's trying to find options for their daughters, is to try a lot of things and find something that they enjoy. There are a lot of opportunities to play. I actually run a camp. This is my 10th year in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, where it's called Girls Only Sports Camp. I have 20 different activities. It's a peer pressure-free environment where I introduce sport to these little girls. We're not competing head-to-head, and it's a peer pressure-free environment. I just want them to experience. If you've never had a field hockey stick in your hands or a lacrosse stick, you're going to get a chance during the week to do so, and that gives them a chance to see something that they may like. Now, if they don't like sport, try to find something that they can get involved in so they can learn the aspects of being part of a team, because for the rest of your life, you're always going to be on one.
Now, I know it was cool for you, Debbie, in conclusion, and this is going on the way back here, just before the holidays, when Louisville was playing Indiana and your son Patrick got in the game, you're doing the broadcast. He hit some shots, man. He hit some shots, got to the free throw line. You had to show your objectivity, but no objectivity with this. Here's the most important question. We've talked about him before. We know that your son is playing well at the University of Louisville, but I want to know how Frankie's doing. Your son that is the inspiration towards Foundations for Awareness for Down Syndrome. Frankie, I've never met Frankie, but he's my guy. I want to know how Frankie's doing.
I can't wait to introduce him to you. He's doing great. He is living independently at Clemson with support, with 2 jobs. He's good for a 3 to 4 hour shift. One of the jobs he works is the Shepherd Hotel. The Shepherd Hotel is a concept built specifically at Clemson in downtown to allow the graduates of Clemson life to transition to a job and employment just like other college grads. And he is living his very best life. I can't imagine Frankie doing anything more than what he's doing right now with his great friend group and his ability to work out, and his schedule is full. And he's got a full life, and we could not be more proud. He's 27 years old, and he's just absolutely killing it. Thank you for asking.
I love it. There's an organization here, Steve Green, the former Indiana great, partnered up with the late, great Carl Erskine and his family. The Erskine Green Institute up in the Muncie area does a very similar program where kids go through that. They graduate from the program, and then they get hospitality jobs in local, both a combination of hospitals and hotels in the area and restaurants. And the feeling of satisfaction in just knowing that they're a member of society, contributing and living on their own is fantastic. So it's great to see. Debbie, I appreciate the time, and certainly look forward to talking to you, especially as we get closer to the season once it gets underway for the Fever.
Man, I love coming on your show, and of everything we talked about, from Girls and Women in Sports Day to the great Caitlin Clark and the rebuild and reconstruction of the Indiana Fever, nothing makes me happier than when you ask me about my son Frankie, because that's where anybody listening can have a great impact on helping somebody that needs a little help.
Appreciate it. That's what it's all about, Debbie. Enjoy the day. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right, thanks, man. See you soon.
All right, Debbie Antonelli on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. You know that Erskine Green Institute, I spent a summer a couple of years ago featuring a different person each day that went through that program. And, you know, it was cool. They partner with one of the hotels in Muncie where, whether it be at the front desk or, you know, obviously the housekeeping or in the restaurant itself, different adults that have, whether it be Down syndrome or, you know, I met a couple that had like very severe ADHD or different just intellectual challenges, and they learned the everyday living principles of not only how to just, you know, pay rent and live and do those things, but also to understand that they have value and that even though maybe they didn't go through the same classes as other kids, that they still have value, and that value allows them to live independently, just like Debbie Antonelli's son Frankie, and make a difference, hold a job. It was great. And for me, admittedly, I guess selfishly speaking, I did these features for Erskine Green because at the time I was between jobs, and they had reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do it on social media. And so I said, well, sure, because I liked what they were doing, and I truly enjoyed meeting the different individuals that I met with, usually over a lunch and talking to them about what they were doing. But it was for me, it was such a humbling thing because we all go through periods and at the time I was between jobs. I had no idea what I was going to do, and probably would have been, and I probably did, like feel sorry for myself or feel down. And then that perspective that was offered to me to be able to see that it's not about, oftentimes, it is so far less about like being the best within your field or the best or whatever else, and more so just about making sure that you're being the best of what you can provide. And I was around these people every day that their victory every day was in being the best version of themselves, as opposed to worrying about, they didn't worry about what other people thought. They were worried about what they could feel about themselves and their own self-worth. And one then parlays into the other, but you can't do it in reverse. And I will always be grateful for the Erskine Green Institute and for people like Debbie's son Frankie, even though I haven't met him, for that perspective, because I think it's just an incredibly important perspective to have, and it makes things a lot easier to then navigate your own challenges each and every day when you feel like things are a little bit down and out. So I've always been appreciative of that. We talked earlier, by the way, and we're going to continue talking about National Girls and Women in Sports, because there is a huge initiative for Indianapolis to become kind of an epicenter for that. And somebody who is a major part of that is probably, well, not probably, I mean, is the driving force behind it, but one of the most influential people in sports that happens to be a woman, is the commissioner of the Horizon League, who's going to join us in studio here just a couple of minutes from now. Julia Rolash is going to join us here just a couple of minutes in studio. But I wanted to get back to last night in the Pacer game, Eddie. We touched on it a little bit. We talked about Indiana and Purdue. But, for the Pacers now, I just think the disappointment was to come back the way they did against Utah. You have to be optimistic about that. But I have always said, when you win a game, and they were supposed to win in Utah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Portland's probably a coin flip just because it's always been a tough place for them to play. I don't know if it's a tough place for them to play as much. I think this would be an interesting stat to go back and look at. And that is, when you go back and look at the fact that they have not won a game in Portland in a non-COVID, so in other words, a crowd game since 2007, how much of that is because, and how much does Portland benefit from, and maybe with a lot of teams from the East coming over, the fact that they are a paired travel game. So it used to be that you would play Portland on the backside of probably going first to Seattle and then going to Seattle and down to Portland and playing Portland, or going to Golden State and then the next night, because if you're an East Coast team, an Eastern Conference team, and you're playing Portland, you're obviously doing it on a multi-game West Coast trip. So more often than not, one would assume that a lot of those games we're talking about, and I'm not going to say the acronym, and if you do, I'm going to mute your mic, even though I don't have that authority. The second game of a back-to-back. If you're doing that, it is tough. I mean, because I've always said this about red eyes. Red eyes, which I've always said are like whiskey. Mm-hmm. They're a good idea at the time, and then afterwards you're like, why in the world did I do that? When you're booking a flight somewhere and you're like, oh, look at this. I can save $200 if I take this red eye. And then 3 months later when that reality comes and it's 10:30 at night Pacific and you're looking at the clock and you're like, it's 1:30 at home and I'm still yet to get on this plane and I got to do such and such tomorrow. It's brutal. But it's not oftentimes the next day that it hits you. It's the 2 days later. So if you have a red eye on a Sunday night, you can kind of get through the Monday. Tuesday, it hits you like a ton of bricks. And when you look at the Pacers going to the West Coast, maybe it wasn't the Utah game where the fatigue kicks in, but maybe the Portland game, because they played the night before, the legs just aren't there and shots aren't dropping. But that does not explain Tyrese Halliburton's passive play last night and not being able to get or look for any shots.
I don't think you can pass on Portland either. They played the previous night as well, and they played an overtime game against Phoenix. So it's not like they were
at home
fresh.
Or were they on the road?
They were at home. So, I mean, they did have that going for them. But
and their body's on that clock, Eddie.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm reaching for excuses, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, but all 5 starters in that game for Portland played at least 41 minutes. Kamara played 45. Avdia played 44. Ayton played 42. Simons played 42.
What about Scoot Henderson? Because he had a decent night last night, right?
He only played in 22. Yeah, he had a really good night last night. He has played really, really well the last probably 2 to 3 weeks for the Trailblazers. But it just felt like Tyrese Halliburton did try to get himself involved at all in that game. Every time he touched the ball, he was just passing. Eddie Gill talks about this from time to time on the radio broadcast of just how the presence of him just, looking at the rim to whether if it's a lob or a floater that we see Tyrese Halliburton hit inside the free throw line, that just wasn't there. There was just no aggression from him last night at all, other than just trying to get others involved.
By the way, is Portland – okay. I've always felt this way, and maybe this is like a generational bias. Excluding the team that you root for. So if you were to take the Pacers out of the equation, or if you live in Chicago, take the Bulls out of the equation, whatever it might be. If you consider arena, fan base, color scheme, logo, great players of past or style of play, competitiveness year in and year out, and I don't mean like over a 2-year stretch. I mean over like 30 years. Is Portland the coolest franchise in the NBA?
Could be, yeah.
Like, they're just kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
Do you know anybody that hates the Blazers? Do you know anybody that's like, man, I'll tell you what, I got to get tickets for that because I want to go and boo I can't stand the Portland Trailblazers. Like, do you know anybody have you ever met anybody that says that?
No.
I mean, I know that maybe like the Phoenix Suns would be in the same category, but you get people that hate the Lakers. Mm-hmm. You get people that hate the Clippers because, whether it be Paul George or just like they've tried like 3 different times to do an installment of ring chasing.
Utah?
I mean, Utah's up there, but there's a lot of people that like John Stockton shorts, very uncomfortable, right? And then Karl Malone's, we've come to learn like, hey, okay. But yeah, I mean, Utah's up there because Utah's just kind of the anomaly anyway, right? I mean, it's like Salt Lake's, I think, a cool place in it, but it's kind of a unique place, but it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. So Utah's up there for sure. Denver's probably up there.
Denver?
We know you're up there when you're in Denver, right?
For sure. We're talking about the mountains. Come on now.
That's right. But honestly, like the Blazers are kind of cool, aren't they? Bill Walton played there and had that huge beard. It's got all these bridges and it's the cool scenery. The city itself has got it does have a bookstore that's awesome, and it also has
Dave Calabro's brother.
Voodoo's Donuts. That's right. Kevin Calabro's there. Voodoo Donuts are awesome. You can get, they sell a voodoo donut that's a voodoo doll, and then except for that it's a jelly donut, and it has a pretzel rod like it's been stabbed with jelly coming out of it. That seems a bit much. I don't know what's going on in Portland, but that seems a bit much. It is National Girls and Women in Sports Day. And one of the absolute leaders of that is hoping to make Indianapolis an epicenter, the global capital of women's sports, joins us in studio next. through on today's Wednesday, right, Eddie?
I think so.
Didn't yesterday, like 6 times, I say it was Wednesday?
I can't
And
remember.
then confused everybody?
Jake, I was here until almost 2 in, so I don't know if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
This is what I'm talking about with those second night of the back-to-backs. You're complaining about the fatigue. Imagine if you had to go out there and play, right?
Oh, Jake, I play. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just telling you. I had one of those days yesterday where I woke up and all day I thought it was a different day, and then it completely threw me off. And the problem being I thought it was a Wednesday and it was Tuesday. So then I got super excited. We were closer to the weekend. We're not. And now I'm doing Wednesday all over again. So I'm very confused by it. But what I did know was this. I didn't know what day of the week it was, but I did know it was National Girls and Women in Sports Day. And I know that when I think about growing up in Indianapolis, as a matter of fact, to bring this full circle, it used to be right off the circle that you could still see on the side facade of one of the buildings here, I've mentioned this 1,000 times, the faded painted signage for the 1982 National Sports Festival, which was essentially the AAU National Championships that took place in Indianapolis, and it was wonderful. And that time, Indianapolis was making a concerted effort to become the amateur sports capital of the world. And that now Indianapolis has gone beyond that. But what we want to do now is make Indianapolis the global capital of women's sports. And somebody who works in a building very close to that building of which I just mentioned is where the Horizon League corporate offices are. It is based right here in Indianapolis. The commissioner of the Horizon League joins me in studio, Julie Rolash. And Julie, you are the point person for this, right? You're going to make Indianapolis the global capital of women's sports, right?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And we walked here because we are just around the corner, our offices. Second, I'm part of a team to drive home this very vision that you just really articulated quite well. We are going to be the capital of women's sports. I think we're well on our way. And this is definitely going to be a major lift by many of us.
You know, I want to go back to, you were an athlete, right?
Long ago, yes.
In college.
Back-to-backs like Eddie.
And that's right. We just talked to Debbie Antonelli about this, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to go back and think of the same. And that is, when you look at being an athlete as a woman when you were a young girl, and maybe some of the stigma that went with that, and the opportunities or the role models that were before you in comparison to what is there today, and yet the amount of work you think still needs to be done.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this offline, but I'll go way back because I grew up in a small town, Southern Illinois, a lot like the movie Hoosiers. Gym was open. I think it was open around the clock. If they closed the doors, it was late. You could play a pickup game anytime you wanted, and I was usually one of very few, if any, girls playing. It was me and a bunch of guys, all ages. I remember I go to high school, we're playing. Girls practiced in, quote, the girls' gym, which was the old gym, played our games in the gym that could hold 2,000-3,000, a lot like some of the gyms around here. The whole town could fit in it. My dad, who probably was not a Title IX proponent until he had a daughter, went to our school board. And my mom, by the way, was president of the school board.
Oh, how about that?
And a little awkward, but made a presentation as to why the school was not in compliance with Title IX, because we girls were at a disadvantage by not practicing in the gym where we played. Also made a pitch for a freshman coach because we had more girls going out than we ever had. Then there was a movement brewing of interest in girls' sports. And I think opened some eyes to, hey, when we talk about equity, it is about opportunity. It's not just about games and having teams. It's about A to Z. Where are they practicing? How are they traveling? How are they playing? And now you fast forward to, I go to Fever games. You and I've talked a lot about the Fever, season ticket holder. Holy cow. I mean, we are standing on the shoulders of so many who've come before us, but now women's sports is telling the story for itself.
And with that, well, first off, let me ask you, do you like the Fever moves? They've had a busy off season here.
I love all the Fever moves. I'm a big Bonner fan, so I'm really excited to see her play, but I think they have completely rounded out that roster.
And I think one of the things, and this is probably true, Julie, even in putting together some of the events that we're going to talk about here, whatever it might be, whether it be in sport, in business, whatever else, it's about finding people that understand their role.
Right.
And I think, clearly we now know the role of Caitlin Clark, okay? I mean, we understand that. But I think it's very important and maybe even challenging to find the right pieces that go along with that, right? I would imagine that for you in running the Horizon League and being involved just in athletics administratively, you can relate to that. Does that make sense?
I think it does, just because I've lived it, and you talked a little bit about when Indianapolis wanted to be the capital of amateur sports. I was working at the NCAA in Kansas City when they announced that the headquarters were moving to Indianapolis. And that, I think, was the culmination of Indy realizing the vision of, we are now the capital of amateur sports because we just got the NCAA to locate here.
Right.
So to your point, now the next is, what's the next big vision? And when the Sports Corp and our board rolled out this 2050 vision, one of the key pillars, I think, that's gained the most traction is to be the capital of women's sports. And you said it, like Caitlin, when we were envisioning what is that going to look like, one of the pieces on the whiteboard that one of our board members wrote down was literally get Caitlin Clark. And she was still playing college at the time, hadn't even declared. So the stars aligned on that point. But to your, I think, larger question is, how do you build this ecosystem where, yes, we've got a star, we've got a championship caliber team at the pro level. We now have Indy Ignite with thousands turning out to watch this new professional volleyball team.
I went to their opening night. It was unbelievable. First off,
same. I was there too.
And this is what I loved about it, Julie. I go to this thing, and I will freely admit to you, relatively naive about volleyball. I mean, I know that there's great high school programs here. Certainly in Muncie is the epicenter of it. But Avon and Carmel and Cathedral, there are great high schools here. But I went to that Indy Ignite game, and they've had several since, 14 home games on the year up at the Fishers Event Center. And I walk in, and it's sold out. But the thing that I thought was great about it was, number one, it was another place for young girls to be able to go with mom or dad and their teammates to go watch top-level athleticism.
Fantastic.
But in addition to that, there were a lot of guys there, too, that were taking it in because it is awesome competition and nonstop action.
Right.
I thought it was awesome.
Same. And they are still turning out fans. We've got a couple staff members that go regularly, thousands of people going to those games. I'm headed to the game tomorrow night and again next week. It's quite an atmosphere. So the point is, if we're going to be the capital of women's sports, we've got the teams, and there are more teams to go. Women's lacrosse is now brewing. Of course, soccer is taking over. I mean, you're seeing the price tags that these franchises are going for with the NWSL and the teams going hard to try to get a team. I think the recognition of the power of women's sports is just beginning. We see it here in Indy up close because of Caitlin and the Fever, and now we're seeing this much broader ecosystem start to erupt.
And the recognition of women's sports is going to be, this is kind of a celebration, I guess, over the next calendar of events of when this takes place, right? Including later today, the Indiana Fever are going to be honored by the State of Tourism. That's going to be coming up at 4 o'clock today. And then tomorrow, we mentioned the Indy Ignite. It is National Girls and Women in Sports Recognition Night for the Indy Ignite, 7 o'clock tomorrow night in Fishers, right?
Right. Be there.
And then coming up on Tuesday, Pacers taking on, I think, the Knicks. Isn't that right, Eddie?
Yep.
Pacers will be taking on the Knicks at 7:30 on Tuesday at the Fieldhouse. These are all the times that are going to be in recognition of National Girls and Women in Sports. And then it only goes further than that, including your own Horizon League. I want to talk about this because you have upcoming, about a month from now, you're going to be busy. Because once again, the Barbasol tournament taking place for men's and women's basketball, all right at the State Fairgrounds right here in Indianapolis, and we're talking about all the schools that are trying to punch their ticket, right?
Yeah, hard to believe year 6 here. So we started in 2020, and each year we've been able to grow it, and Barbasol's now come on and stayed on as a title sponsor. Not a lot of Division I conferences combine their men's and women's championship in the way we do. We're excited that the Big Ten will be here, the women before, the men after ours. We actually have the women's and men's semifinals on the same day on March 10th. And then the women's game at noon. It's going to be on ESPN2 this year, but we'd rather the Indy folks come out to the game on that March 11th date. And then, of course, in the evening is the men's game on ESPN. What's really exciting, though, again this year 4, is our International Women's Day event. Mel Raines from the Pacers was our headliner last year. Kelly Krauskopf, again, we're talking about the Fever. She's going to be our headliner this year with MK Hughes, who's the president of Indy Ignite. So a lot of different, I think, as you've noted, there's a celebration happening this week and next about National Girls and Women in Sport. But this is not just a moment. We're part of a movement. And when you just look at the first half of this calendar year, there's some amazing events of women competing. but also continued celebrations. And we haven't even mentioned the All-Star game.
Yeah, the All-Star game is going to be taking place. That's February 22nd, right? Fisher's Event Center. That's the professional volleyball All-Star game that's taking place.
Right, one of
for
them.
the Indy Ignite, right? What's that?
I said one of them, right? That's the first All-Star game our city gets to host.
That's right.
And then WNBA, of course, is coming here in July. And I'm lucky to be on that planning board. I went to the meeting the other night, Jake, and I couldn't believe all that is happening, not just in Indy, but in and around the state, from a community impact, from Fan Fest. The entire Pacers organization is committed to making this an accessible event in terms of so many different marquee opportunities for a community to get involved.
July 18th and 19th, by the way, when
Yes.
the All-Star game is going to be taking place for the WNBA here. And another thing, Julie, when we know that the Fever are building a new entire complex just north of the field house.
Amazing.
Okay. I was a little bit disappointed is the wrong word. I kind of wanted a plaque because it's the location of the old jail, and I kind of wanted it recognized where I spent 40 hours there in 1995. Clerical error, by the way. It was expunged, so I want to make sure that everybody's aware. But, that's...
You want to memorialize that?
Well, listen, it was... When you go through it, you're thinking to yourself, well, at least something's got to come of this, right? Clerical error, I want to make sure everybody knows it was expunged. But no, kidding aside, when I was a kid, I would go to Pacer games and drive home, and I grew up in Indy, and I had a great pride and love for this town. And everything from Leon's Tailoring, that I would see the signage for it and know that it was a heritage place in town, and driving up Delaware headed back home. For young girls now to see a complex, a facility, a state-of-the-art location that is centered around women's athletics has to be huge in the steps you're talking about.
You're right. I mean, and I of course didn't have that growing up.
Right.
To see that, and it's not just going to be a practice facility. As the Pacers organization has continued to unveil the plans, this is going to be a state-of-the-art training and performance-based facility. So how is it that women athletes need to train different to maximize their bodies? I mean, to think about the focus and how they want to design a different facility that completely is focused on these elite female athletes. It is going to be, not to your point, not just inspiring, I think, for young girls to see, you talk about, I was just trying to get in the gym where I played games as a high school kid. Now, kids today are just assuming that, and thank goodness they are, that is how elite athletes should be treated, regardless of gender.
Well, I think also in any walk of life, no matter what you do, to have, and we both know, you can set the highest of aspiration for yourself, and you may never reach that ultimate plateau, but if the plateau is there for you to see, then it allows you to aspire towards something.
That's right. Well said.
And now there is that plateau.
Right.
That was an invisible plateau for too long, right?
Absolutely. We had a celebration brunch this morning in our offices, Horizon League offices, along coasted with Marvella, and Dr. Allison Barber was there, and Tamika Catchings. And she made the comment, while not everyone will be a WNBA player or even an all-star, all girls need the ability to see and to experience meaningful competition and meaningful facilities and complexes and have good coaching. And of course, they were talking about this Marvella complex that is being launched and really exciting up in Fair Oaks. But I just thought, I think Tamika was saying the same thing as you, is yes, we all may aspire, especially as young kids, to be pros in sports.
Right.
Even if we don't meet that, to recognize that is how pro athletes are treated at all levels.
Yeah, you're pushing yourself every day,
Yes,
right? To become a better version in some aspect.
Right.
Right. Two of the hottest teams right now in college basketball on the men's and women's side of things, riding huge streaks, are in the Horizon League.
That's right.
You've got, if I'm not mistaken, Purdue Fort Wayne is at 15 straight on the women's side.
Right.
Cleveland State is red hot on the men's side.
13.
They are going to try to get into the NCAA tournament right here about a month from now in Indianapolis. But most importantly, as we're talking about, athletics sometimes are the conduit towards making people aware of things with which they might not have previously been aware. And we talked about this last year, but I wanted to revisit it because I love the significance of it. And that is, everybody's going to be wearing a button here that says Coach Mack. The coaches will be wearing that. And then once again, I think it will be recognized. And we're talking about a time when not everybody could come together.
Right.
when everybody comes together for the Horizon League Championships. Tell me about what you guys will be recognizing again.
Coach Mack is Coach John McClendon, first black coach who was hired at a predominantly white institution, which happened to be Cleveland State. And it was now 4 years ago, because this will be our 5th year celebrating his legacy, that we launched at the time Coach McClendon Day. And each of our campuses recognized he wasn't just a pioneer in terms of the first minority hired at Cleveland State, but more importantly, he then became basketball coach, Hall of Fame, and then a true voice of social justice and talking about the power of integration. You did an incredible piece last year on the secret game where he orchestrated his team, which was, of course, a historically black institution team. They played against a white team. Of course, his team beat the socks off of them.
Right.
And then they integrated and had a scrimmage, which it wasn't. Now this was true integration, which is obviously what the power of sport does. It breaks down all barriers. So we continue to celebrate his legacy. We now do it for a week instead of a day, and that we're going to officially launch it, as you said, the week of February 16th. So all of our coaches will be wearing those pins, men and women. Our student athletes celebrate his legacy. We're just really privileged that we can associate with him in this way.
It's funny. I was talking to my high school principal, Dr. Eugene White, who has worked in various capacities throughout the city of Indianapolis, and he played collegiately at an HBCU, historically black college, at Alabama A&M. And I had mentioned Coach Mack to him at one point. And he said, "Oh, Jake, you have no idea. The way that guy mastered the fast break and the style of play that he played," he said, nobody could keep up with it.
Yep,
And he said for him, for Dr. White, it was of great, I think, appreciation because that was one of the guys that, because he was playing a style that other teams looked at, they didn't think about whether it was white or black. It was the game of basketball.
Right.
And what can we learn from what he's bringing to the game of basketball? And that's the first step in an understanding and a bridge, right, which comes together. And that is something that you hope that young girls see as well, is that sport in school with their peers and in their aspirations allows them the opportunity to overcome those barriers and get to the places where their goal is. And that's why it is so important on National Girls and Women in Sports Day to recognize all of it and to, again, aspire for Indianapolis to become the global epicenter, right?
Exactly.
And so that makes you would be basically the president of this whole movement, right?
I'm just a part of it.
That's what I'm making you know. I'm telling
Sounds like
you.
you're on the advisory board.
What's that?
You're going to be on the advisory
All
board.
right, fair enough. Listen, I'll be on any board I can. That's the first time anybody's invited me to anything of any sort of importance or recognition, so it is greatly appreciated. Again, tonight, State of Tourism will be honoring the Indiana Fever. That's at 4 o'clock, coming up just a couple hours from now. But the big thing, the first in these calendar of events, is National Girls and Women in Sports Recognition Night at the Indy Ignite game taking place on Thursday at 7 o'clock at the Fishers Event Center, just one of a number of events. And then don't forget Horizon League Championships as well, starting in early March. Julie Rolash is the commissioner of the Horizon League. Julie, I appreciate it as always. It's always
You
good
too.
to see you.
Likewise.
And we look forward to seeing the games coming up
Sounds
in
great.
about a month.
Thank
as a matter
you.
of fact. All right, we'll come back. We're going to talk a little bit of what happened last night in Portland. We'll do it with Dustin. Now, is it Dopirak or Dopirak? I always get thrown off with that last name.
Dopirak.
Do we have it there? All right, Dustin Dopirak. He's going to join us coming up 2 o'clock hour here on a Wednesday. It is a Wednesday, I promise, on Query & Company. nickname in your baseball playing days, Eddie? You'd come up with bases juiced. Were you Eddie Money?
Actually, yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Actually, yes, Jake. Believe it or not. Because you could always count on me. I was dependable.
Well, you should have been called the calculator, right?
Why would you call me the calculator then?
Because I could always count on you.
Okay. I guess that's true. To some extent.
What was your batting average?
I honestly could tell you. Could care less. That was
8 years technically
ago.
You would say I could not care less.
Whatever.
If you could care less, that would mean that, in fact, there is a value that is less than what you care, which means that, but you could not care less, correct?
Correct.
If you had a bet, 300 hitter, in high school baseball, don't guys bat like 500, 600? Isn't that like a top-tier player?
I mean, if you're Max Clark, then yeah.
That's what I'm saying. A top-tier player bats 500 or 600, right?
Yeah. Same for softball.
Now, softball, let me tell you, and I'm not just saying this because we just got done talking about, the women in sports. I think one of the most underappreciated, although I think it's growing in terms of interest. I love watching the softball World Series.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing in terms of the diamond and the way that the compact nature of the diamond and how fast the ball comes off the bat, the reaction time that is necessary in that is incredible.
It is indeed.
Now, my oldest sister, was in the Big League World Series. So basically the equivalent of the Little League World Series, but for, at that time, you had, obviously, it was basically summer ball for softball. And my sister, in 1984, so right after she graduated from high school, and she was a very good player. And I can still tell you the entire starting lineup of her team. But her team, and I she is 6.5 years older than I, so I went to every single game, and they won the state, they won the regional, and then they qualified for the Big League World Series, and you can imagine the enthusiasm for that. And you know where it was? I mean, I remember they played a team from Washington and a team from Fullerton, California, were the two teams they played in the World Series itself. You know where they got to travel?
Omaha.
Omaha would have been cool, right? Indianapolis. The one year that it just happened to be right here in Indy, and I'm like, wait a minute, you qualify for that whole thing, and that's what you get to go downtown and play, which was cool. But it would have been cooler to probably travel for it, right? But it was still fun. Dustin Dopirak going to join us. We're going to talk about what happened with the Pacers last night in Portland and go over why Tyrese Halliburton only got 3 shots. We'll do it next. 2 o'clock in Indianapolis. For that matter, it is 2 o'clock everywhere in the Eastern time zone. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, the other voice you hear on this program. Query and Company is what we call it here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. The Pacers last night, disappointment in Portland. Now they are, in fact, in California. They will be taking on the two-step of the Clippers and the Lakers. But between now and then, the trade deadline looms. And joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, he is the beat writer for the Indianapolis Star, talking about, of course, Dustin
Dopirak,
who joins us on the program. Dustin, we'll begin with trade deadline. Do you imagine that today or until bleeding into tomorrow, there is going to be sizable activity involving the Indiana Pacers?
I mean, it doesn't seem that way. I mean, obviously, I've been wrong before as far as that's concerned. I mean, I was sort of surprised at the Buddy move last year, but I mean, there does not seem to be a whole lot of chatter going into tomorrow involving the Pacers. It seems like the Miles Turner discussion has faded out at this point. I mean, obviously anything can happen. He's still a valuable player, and if somebody wants to make a Godfather offer, if you will, I mean, I'm sure they're not done taking calls, and certainly I think you have to consider the possibility of an Obi Toppin move. But I mean, it seems to be trending toward something decidedly less than that. I mean, I think so Tony East pointed out, I mean, you have to at least look at moving the expiring contracts and try to make sure that you're, carrying, and you hate to say it because obviously these guys had very severe legitimate injuries, but, dead weight, basically having two roster spots for guys who have Achilles tendon tears. I mean, they could use maybe a little bit more depth if they could try to move, make a small move. But, certainly don't expect to see something major, and as you get closer to it, it seems like there's less and less, just talk that involves Miles Turner. And if Turner's not going to move, that limits the availability of there being a major trade involving the Pacers.
Do you believe, Dustin, if Friday Miles Turner is still a Pacer, which I 99.9% I anticipate, right? Do you think that is more so because Indiana is confident they will be able to re-sign him and thus there was no need to move along? Or is it because strictly there was nothing that came along that was of intrigue to them and therefore they still don't know whether they will be able to retain him, but they just weren't able to get anything for him?
I mean, I think a little bit of both. I don't think that they can't get anything for him, but I think it's very specific what you have to get for him. Like you have to set a high price there. Like, I mean, I guess it seems in terms of the chatter I've seen, and it makes sense to me, is that they absolutely weren't willing to even take a call that didn't involve a starting level center. And because I think, I think they view this team as valuable in and of itself. I mean, they're fourth place in the East. They've made an Eastern Conference Finals run already. I mean, this is not a group that you throw away, because you have to find a way to get under the luxury tax next year. So, I mean, I think it's not so much, I mean, you could get stuff from Miles Turner. I mean, if the Lakers would give you stuff, but the Lakers don't have a center to give you, and so they have to involve a third team. And, you have to, meet that team's, needs and demands. I mean, basically, you'd have to get, in terms of guys that are out there, you'd have to find a way to get, somebody like a Vucevic in Chicago involved to even be close to breaking even there. And then, that's a guy, I mean, he's 34. Do you want to re-sign him going forward? You still have to think of the future. I mean, I think, again, you can get stuff. It's not like Miles Turner is not a commodity. He absolutely is. But, he's, you have to be able to match that. There's only so many centers on the market that can do what he can do, or even if they do something different that are as productive as he is, and you would have to find a way to get one back. I mean, if you there's no purpose in creating a hole in your lineup so that you have to go fill it.
Dustin Dopirak is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Dustin, the other question that comes into play is, again, I'm going to stick with the Turner theme before we move along here.
Sure.
If they are to retain Miles Turner, thought would be that they're going to have to probably go over, and I do personally think they are willing, at least in the short term, to go into the tax, which would be the first time I think in 18 years. I do believe Indiana is willing to do that. But if they aren't, or if they don't go over it in an exorbitant amount, they would have to free up some roster space, some salary space. Obi Toppin's name comes into play with that a lot. Legitimacy to that, or is that just us making up fictional numbers?
I mean, certainly thinks there's certainly legitimacy because they are numbers. I mean, you have to look at you'd clear 13, 14 million off the books. Obviously, his contract I think goes up every year by like $1 million. So when you're talking about a $58 million contract, you could use some level of space. And obviously, you can't trade him for nothing, though. I mean, like obviously, the way these things move once you get into luxury tax, once you get over the cap under luxury tax, I mean, someone has to match money. They have to give you somebody that would that makes as much money as he does, or a couple guys who do. And for that tax to actually clear, those contracts have to expire. So there's a certain amount of guys that makes sense for. And, again, like he is still a commodity. He's still a guy that matters to this team in terms of what he does. I mean, his ability to, run and finish and play in transition matters. I mean, he's been up and down as far as defensive rebound is concerned. He had a really good stretch in December, less in January. But in terms of trying, I think going over the tax is not so much their problem. It's, are you going to be willing to go over the first apron? And then, it's really a harder question in terms of, do you have the team that you need? Because if you intend to make a title run, once you get over that first apron, I mean, you're closer to set in terms of what you have. And then once you get to the second apron, you're really jammed as far as being able to try to make any other move if you want to do anything else to kind of improve your roster. And you still have to consider, you do have, I think, first-round pick for next year. They have to, bring rookies and young guys into this as well and pay them what they're owed. So I think it's certainly worth considering. But again, it's a question of what do you get back. I don't think they want to take a back step with this team. I think that's the big issue is they want to make sure that whatever they're getting, it doesn't dramatically hurt this team and cost it an opportunity to make a playoff run, which they seem to have a chance to do.
Why does Tyrese Halliburton seemingly have nights where he just lacks aggression?
Hey, thanks so much, Chris.
Who are we thinking there?
That is Royce, our Uber driver, and he's a big Cubs fan, so he sends his regards.
Wait, Uber driver? Now, where did you just Uber from, and how much was it?
It was I think $35 on the thing. I Ubered from. I'm still in Portland, so I Ubered from my hotel to the airport.
Okay, the Portland airport's not a bad airport, by the way. Did you go to Voodoo Donuts while you were in Portland?
I did not get a chance to go over to Voodoo Donuts. That was a clear misread on my part.
Have you been to Voodoo Donuts?
I've had Voodoo Donuts. I don't know if I've been to a Voodoo Donuts.
Yeah, because they're kind of, for those that don't know, Voodoo Donuts in Portland are kind of like Longs here. Like you hear about them all over the place, right? You see them everywhere you go.
Yeah.
It's kind of a staple.
No, absolutely.
Okay, so you're getting ready to obviously fly to California from Portland, but anyway, so Halliburton and just his lack of aggressiveness. What's the story there?
I mean, at least part of it is he absolutely takes a back step whenever a team decides, all right, we're taking a defender, we're face guarding you with him, and we are going to refuse to let you score. That's the view, and it's just okay, I think he certainly did with, I think, Jalen Wells back in Memphis, and they had some success there of just basically saying okay, I'm going to stand back here and let you guys work. If I take this defender out of the equation, then okay, we go 4-on-4 and we're better built for that than you are. And at this point, they're not better built for that than Portland is. Portland really has a lot of good defenders. I mean, that team's growing up fast. They're running 6'7", 6'9", 6'9" at you from 2 to 4, and then you've got 8 and at the 5. And it just seemed like nobody was really able to take advantage of last night. Everybody kind of seemed relatively dead. But I mean, Kamara just sort of took Halliburton out of what he wanted to do and was never really able to get into it. So I think that's to some extent it's there's a strategy to it as far as just saying, okay, if this guy's just going to follow me, let's if he's going to not help, not play any kind of help defense, all right, that's what you're going to do. I'm just going to take you out of the equation. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
By the way, is it a clear enough day? There's one path if you're going from downtown Portland to the airport on a clear day where you can see Mount Hood. It's incredible, but it's not every day that it's clear enough for that. Was it clear enough today?
It was not clear enough today. It was clear enough yesterday, though. Mount Hood was gorgeous. Yeah, it was sunny and clear yesterday. Today it snowed this morning, and it was rainy and wet and just generally very, generally very Portland. So it's a lot of haze and a lot of clouds, and that's kind of what you see most of the time. It's very rare that it's sunny in Portland, but it was sunny yesterday, and so Mount Hood was pretty majestic.
Eddie, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's often a haze over Portland, just so you know.
Oh,
right?
Now you've got my attention.
In multiple ways.
I can assure you there is often a haze over Portland. Dustin, before we let you go board your plane, This roster in general, assuming that they stand pat here, and I think they probably are going to, maybe a bit move, but nonetheless, it does feel like they have rounded the corner now, and in particular, and I know obviously you'd love to have more depth at the center position, but now the rotations are feeling a little bit more steady. Jarris Walker is the one that I think probably has slid down a little bit. Are they content with that, or do they do something that gets Walker back into more rotation, and there still is that last area of juxtaposition to be had?
It is a fascinating kind of discussion because, I mean, obviously got into it with not got into it. We didn't obviously fight over it, but like talked to Rick about that after Monday, and I thought he had some good moments checking in. Obviously, Miles Turner was out for that, so he was 10-man rotation. They found a way to get him some minutes. Obviously, he got in, I think, in the second quarter again. I think early in the third. Ended up scoring 9 points, hit a couple good buckets. Had the 180 dunk. It's interesting because I think Carlisle isn't upset with what he's doing, but he's also not willing to sort of part or move from anybody who's ahead of him. And in particular, certainly Aaron Nesmith and Ben Shepherd. I mean, they still view those guys as valuable commodities, and they certainly view Andrew Nembhard and Benedict Mathurin as valuable, and those are the guys that are ahead of him. And I think technically, if you're going to move Toppin, and if you don't bring anybody that really takes that spot, you could move Walker back to the 4. But I think. They're continuing to put him in spots where he kind of has to earn it. And he has to sort of fight for his minutes. I think one thing Carlisle said the other night, he's like, I wish every top 10 pick had to learn about getting in the NBA the way he does. I really respect how he's working it, but I think this is developing him. He's having to fight for minutes, and talked to Walker about that, and he kind of smiled about it. Like, I asked how he's doing with the emotional part of it. He's like, well, I don't love it, but I am trying to work hard and get better. So I mean, it is an awkward sort of juxtaposition at this point. Again, that you're really making your lottery pick, fight for minutes and sometimes not get them. So you would think it makes sense to make a consolidation trade to move some space out so he gets more clear minutes. Certainly he has had a rotation spot for most of this year prior to Nesmith coming back from the ankle sprain. But I mean, it makes sense from a roster management standpoint to make sure he's more steady. But I think I guess Carlisle likes the fact that he's got to push for these, but it's awkward. But I also don't think he wants to move any of the guys that are ahead of him. And the guy loves Ben Shepherd. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Loves the fact that he can always just trust what he's going to do, and he certainly considers Nesmith, Mathurin, and Nembhard to be critical pieces at the 2 and the 3, and they still like Toppin. So I think on one hand it makes a lot of sense for them to do that and say, hey, you've got this really talented 6'7", 230-pound guy with a 7-foot wingspan or whatever it is, 7'2.5". Let this guy just play. But they don't want to necessarily part with anything that's ahead of them. They like the fact that they have 11 guys worth of depth, and it helps them just run a full court press if they want to.
Dustin, I appreciate the time. We will let you get to the airport. Not a huge airport in Portland, right? Like a pretty manageable airport.
Manageable airport, yeah. Doable. They're doing construction above my head right now, so I guess they're trying to make it bigger.
Do you like Portland, the city of Portland?
I do. It's been, I think, on these 3 trips, did the NCAA tournament back when IU was in it back in 2012. Always enjoyed Portland. I mean, it is what it is. It's usually rainy. It's usually cloud covered and everything. But I think it has a cool vibe. Not everybody thinks so, but I think it does.
Dustin, I know you're on work when you go to these arenas. Do you ever walk around and take in all the different arenas that you go to?
Walk around? I mean, you have to in the arenas, but they're not you take in the cities more than you take in arenas. I mean, college gyms are all fascinating and interesting and different. Most NBA arenas are just about the same.
I was about to ask you about that.
That are different.
Because you're about to go to the Clippers' new arena.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this. This is different. Obviously, this is going to be a different scene. I'm intrigued by the whatever Steve Ballmer has built. I mean, he's seen it obviously a little bit on TV, but I haven't. It seems like the sort of thing you can't really grasp and take in until you're actually in the building. So I'm very intrigued to see what this is going to look like.
Now, the Clippers arena is different than the Lakers arena, than the old Staples, correct?
Yeah. They moved out to Inglewood area. They got a new place into a dome. It's apparently giant and interactive, and there's a big wall of video stuff. I don't know.
It's over by SoFi, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So close to the airport and stuff.
Justin, just so you know, now I know this is a weird queryism here, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you have downtime in L.A., which I'm sure you have plenty of, fabulous, huge, historic cemetery right across from Inglewood, just so you know.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Indy 500 winners are there. I think that might be the one where Eazy-E is too. Eazy-E is buried.
Really?
Yeah. Well, Eazy-E's grave, his family at the time that Eazy-E, Eric Wright as he was known, or as his real name, and he was known as Eazy-E, his family didn't want people going to his gravesite routinely, and so he is actually buried in a predominantly Korean section of a cemetery. So it is almost entirely graves that headstones are in Korean script, and then all of a sudden there's one for Eazy-E, and it says Eric Wright, we loved him, but God loved him more. That's what it says, and there's usually a couple of bottles of Old English and stuff like that laying around. Just so you know.
But of course,
So
I would
since you didn't go to Voodoo Donuts, there's your trip in L.A.
So Eazy-E's resting place is where I should be. All right.
Yes, of course. And I
I'm
will
gonna
say,
see if I can pull that off.
fabulous views of the city. All right, Dustin, appreciate it. Travel safe. All right.
I will do.
All
Thank
right,
you.
that's Dustin Dopirak on the Express Pro Tires and Auto Gas line. Again, going back to the Turner thing, and I know that we're, it's a dead horse now to the point of being glue. But I don't think they're going to move him, and I don't think that they had any intention of moving him. And that seemed to always be, when it comes to Miles Turner, the discussion always seems to be from one side and not the other.
So Kevin Bowen tweeted this out a little over 3 hours ago. He recorded earlier today with Rick Carlisle because they're out west, and it'll air tomorrow morning on the Fan Morning Show with he and Mark Dykton. And he said, quote, "No, I do not," when asked if the Pacers will have any activity at the trade deadline. He doesn't expect them to have any.
Yeah. Again, every once in a while, the trade deadline to me, the Pacers more often than not, there was about a 10-year stretch where I always felt like if I was a general manager and the Indiana Pacers called me at the trade deadline, I would immediately hang up the phone because I would say, yeah, they fleece everybody. I mean, the most famous being, and I've got to think of my exact timeline on this, but the Pacers had Mark Jackson at the point guard, and they traded him, and I don't know if it was a trade deadline or offseason deal or whatever, but they traded Mark Jackson for Jalen Rose. And they got Jalen Rose, and they had Jalen Rose running the point. And then I think they thought, you know what, we'd probably be better off with Jalen Rose, not at the point, but rather as kind of a 2-3 combo guy. And you know who would be really good in this offense running it would be Mark Jackson, who they'd already had. So they call up Denver, and I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, and I have to look this up, but I believe it was Eddie Johnson and Vincent Askew they sent to Denver and got Jackson back. So now all of a sudden you're like, okay, so now we have Jalen Rose and Mark Jackson. And it turned out to be fabulous because Rose, many, many people, one of the great trivia questions ever to ask people where you would win a trivia contest till the cows come home. And that is, in the Pacers' lone season of being an NBA finalist, who was their leading scorer? 99% of people will say Reggie Miller. And if you say that's incorrect, 96.7% of people will tell you it was Rick Smits. And if you say that's incorrect, 38.9% of people would maybe throw a Hail Mary of Chris Mullin, even though Mullin at that point had kind of been relegated. But it was Jalen Rose. Jalen Rose, I think, can you look up for me, Eddie? I'm going off the top of my head here, okay? I'm going to say that in the 1999-2000 NBA season, that Jalen Rose averaged 19.6 points per game for the Pacers. I'm literally spitballing that number, but for whatever reason, that's like somewhat stuck in my head. If you look up the season statistics of the 1999-2000 Indiana Pacers and their scoring leaders, Eddie is looking right now and computing it. As we know, he is crafty with knowing his baseball numbers. What was Reggie Miller's scoring average? We'll begin with that.
18.1.
18.1 for Reggie Miller. What was Rick Smits?
Rick Smits, 12.9.
12.9. Chris Mullin, I'm going to guess, was 8.8 by that time.
5.1.
Okay.
Austin Crozier, 10.3.
Sam Perkins, 5.5 a game.
6.6.
Travis Best, I'm going to go with 7.9.
8.9.
Okay. Oh, 8. That's a good number for Reggie Miller. Okay. Jalen Rose, was he the leading scorer that year?
He was.
What was Jalen Rose's scoring average?
18.2.
And what was Reggie Miller's?
18.1.
Darn it. I said 19.6. Okay. Well, he was the leading scorer, though. Great trivia question. But, again, another deal they made, I remember.
That's a bar bet.
This one I remember being livid about. Livid. Detlef Schrempf. They sent Detlef Schrempf to Seattle. They had gotten Detlef Schrempf from Dallas. And if I'm not mistaken, and I got to think on this, they traded Detlef Schrempf might have come. I got to think on this one. Who they sent to Dallas? They sent Herb Williams to Dallas to get Detlef Schrempf, correct?
I'll look it up to
And
validate.
and Detlef Schrempf was a good player, a really good player. But they had Detlef Schrempf, and then they needed a defensive player. And at the time, it was literally, I remember people being like, what in the world are they doing? They just traded Detlef Schrempf, who was a good player, had been an all-star, was a dynamic shooter.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, I'm going to guess that they acquired Detlef Schrempf.
Do you want to know the team he was traded to?
Well, I know he was traded to what I'm getting at, but I'm saying when they acquired him. When the Pacers got Detlef Schrempf,
Oh, okay.
they sent Herb Williams to Dallas for Detlef Schrempf in around 1980, I'm going to guess 6, somewhere in there, 85 or 86?
89.
Okay, 89 is when they got him, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then they traded him, I'm going to guess in 93, they traded Detlef Schrempf to Seattle for Derek McKee.
Yes.
And Derek McKee, I'm telling you, that was one of those moves. And that's why when it comes to the trade deadline, when moves are made sometimes, it is just a precursor of other moves. Because when they got Derek McKee, it literally was like, what in the world are they doing? Derek McKee, like he's the guy that was eating a plastic Big Mac basketball burger in the 87 college basketball issue for Alabama, and then is just kind of, he's just a guy. And I know that people, because he did not stay healthy in the ending part of his career, people want to chastise Derek McKee. But I'm telling you, there was no more important piece in the early building of the Pacers' dynasty years, and when I say dynasty, I mean relatively speaking for the franchise, than the versatility and, more importantly, the wing defense of Derek McKee. Derek McKee is if you could take any player from the Pacers' past and put him on this roster that would put them over the top, it would be Derek McKee. Because he was 6'9", he could shoot without the ball having to go through him. But Derek McKee, this is an amazing statistic about him. And I'm spitballing the numbers, but this is the kind of analytics the Pacers break down on things. Derek McKee, in the time that he was in Indiana, had the highest increase or if you will, of shooting percentage of shots that he took in the last 5 seconds of a shot clock set than like any player they've had. If he was a 58% shooter from the floor, 42% shooter from the floor, he was like a 52% shooter. I'm just throwing numbers out there for the sake of the discussion. When they would look at it, and in other words, when he had to put a shot up because the shot clock was running down, he actually was the one that they determined was the most consistent in those situations. But people forget the 98 Bulls and those Jordan Bulls teams, they will tell you, Michael Jordan will tell you that Indiana was the team that he had the most difficulty against, and it was Derek McKee that was the reason for that, because he was such a great wing defender against dynamic, shorter, and faster players, because he had such a lateral quickness, and in addition to that, his length. He was also a very good passer. His health was a question late, no question about it. And because he played very smooth, a lot of people thought his motor was in question. But my point being long-winded and circuitously here is that when trade deadlines are made and moves are made, at the time you question it. But then when you see the other pieces that are then built around it, like they knew Antonio Davis was coming in. They knew that Dale Davis was getting ready to hit his absolute, the peak of his performance. And that's what they needed was wing defense, because they had the interior taken care of. And So if they make a move tonight, which I don't think they will, or tomorrow, as Rick Carlisle said, he doesn't anticipate it. But if there's a move that's made, sometimes you look at it and go, what?
3 p.m. tomorrow is the trade deadline.
And then a year later, it makes sense. Trade deadline, 3 o'clock tomorrow. My quick math tells me that is exactly 24 hours and 34 minutes from this exact moment. This is Dispatch, correct?
Yeah.
We have tickets to give away for Dispatch, correct?
Si, senor.
I would like to guess this, and I don't know the answer to this. Can you please look up for me, Eddie, the band dispatch, which, by the way, the tickets that we have to give away, these are for when exactly?
Excuse me, didn't mean to snuffle my nose there. They are for a concert at the Everwise Amphitheater at the White River State Park on Wednesday, June 18th.
Okay, Wednesday, June 18th. That'll be a perfect night. I mean, listen, just in general, it goes without saying that events, when you go out there to the Everwise Amphitheater at White River State Park, I mean, they've done an unbelievable job, really, since it opened, but now just the overhang, and, I mean, it's such a cool venue, and there's such a fun thing about going downtown, summer night, listening to the show. That music is great.
We've got some unsportsmanlike conduct penalties here, Jake.
What's that?
We've got some unsportsmanlike conduct penalties here.
No, what do you mean by that?
Remember yesterday we had some false starts?
Yeah,
Today,
we did.
It's a full-on unsportsmanlike conduct.
People calling in already.
Yeah.
We're not giving them away just yet. Here's how we're going to do it, Eddie. We're going to do this in a trivia fashion, which I always have fun with. Can you please look up for me and don't tell me what it is.
Okay.
You know what? Here's the thing. I just realized if I tell you to look something up and you are looking it up, then the people listening are going to know what the trivia question is going to be, right?
Or it could all be a ploy to where you set it up to where they look this up and it's a total 180.
That's the old bait and switch.
Yeah.
That's fair. I am looking up right now because I want to make sure that it's not like completely random. Okay. We're going to do this in trivia fashion. Okay? And it has to do with the band Dispatch, which is obviously, can you play a little more of that? Because they sound pretty cool. They sound very cool. They are a jam band, an indie folk jam band. People love that kind of stuff, especially in the summertime, right?
The bongos.
We're going to give this away based on a trivia question, okay, at 239-1070. Do we have a caller lined up, Eddie, by chance?
Well, see, we ran them all off by telling them they were early unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. Now the phone lines are lighting up at 317-239-1070.
So should we do this roulette style, or we probably should have had
so.
a meeting about this? I'm anticipating at any point our boss is coming in going, you guys should have talked about this beforehand. These guys are cool. This is cool, man, right? Okay, go ahead and do it roulette style on line number 2. Line number 2, you are currently on the air here on Query and Company. What is your name, sir or madam?
My name is Jacob. How are you guys doing?
Jacob, we are good, man, and I love the fact that your name is Jacob. How old a fella are you, Jacob?
I'm 33 years old.
33-year-old Jacob, okay.
He's in his Miles Turner.
And Jacob, are you a working man? Is there a title you'd like within the company here?
If I can get the title of HVAC director, that'd be great.
HVAC director. I was thinking at one point we might have had an HVAC director, but you know that's a team sport, right? So you are more than welcome to be part of that. All right, Jacob. Here's my trivia question for you for the tickets on the line. Are you ready?
No, but go ahead.
Are you familiar with the band Dispatch?
Slightly, but yes.
Okay.
A little bit.
This band hails from a state in the Northeast that is very fitting for it being an indie kind of jam band rock feel. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't surprise me if they become successful enough that an ice cream corporation names an ice cream after them because it's from the same state. What state is Dispatch from?
Oh, no. Oh, no. I'm going to guess. You said northwest, right?
No. Northeast, up in the Northeast. Yep. Very earthy.
Very earthy.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, if you ever look, here's a hint for you, Jacob. This particular state, it and its neighboring state are often confused when you look at a map. But if you want to know which one is which, this state, in terms of its boundary lines, kind of looks like the first letter of the state name. And that's how you know when you look at a blank map which one it is versus its neighboring state that is very similar.
Oh my goodness.
Their Division I basketball program makes the tournament every so often, and I believe they're Are they the Cata, or what are they called, Eddie?
Catamounts?
The Catamounts. That's correct. The Catamounts. And they had a kid from Columbus that had unfortunately, a terrible injury that he bounced back from and triumphantly went to the university anyway and graduated.
I'm going to get this totally wrong, but I'm going to just say Virginia.
Oh, Jacob, hold on.
Man.
Hold on, Jacob. Stay on the line. Stick with the first syllable there, but try a second state. Say with the same syllable. Start saying the same thing, but go with a different state.
Okay. What?
If you let me ask you this: if you were to see raccoons, if you're doing your HVAC work, right, and somebody calls you up and they go, "Look, I got something. There's some droppings," and you were to say, "Yeah, you know what you got there is you got some what would you say it is? Like what kind of
Vermont? Let's go. Was that right?
Yes. Yes.
Jacob, yeah, you did that all by yourself, Jacob.
Thank you,
Jacob.
Thank you. And you do not look like the guy that's the beast.
Well, hell, Jacob, you could have said that from the beginning and saved the whole effort. I'd have given you the whole front row.
Ron Perlman.
I do not look like Ron Perlman. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate it. Eddie will get your information, and we will get you on about your way.
I like how he waited to the end to deliver the punchline there with that
Middlebury, Vermont is, in fact, the hometown of Dispatch, the band. Have you been to Vermont, Eddie?
No. What's the ice cream corporation you were referring to?
Ben & Jerry's.
Oh, okay.
Ben & Jerry's is based out of Vermont. Vermont is like, so if you ever go to, here is a true Jake Query story, and then we'll get back to talking basketball here before John comes in. Several years ago, I was looking for a documentary about the Vietnam War. As a matter of fact, Ken Burns' Vietnam documentary, which is fantastic. I highly recommend it.
I am always enamored with how your brain works and the things that you were interested in and finding more information about.
I take that as a compliment. So
it is a compliment.
I was downloading, or I went to go download the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary, and the first suggestion that popped up was a documentary called My Father's Vietnam. And I'm like, what in the world is this, right? So I downloaded it. It was a 2-hour documentary, and I thought, well, this looks interesting. My Father's Vietnam was a filmmaker from Connecticut, recalled that when he was a child, he had gone to the Vietnam Wall with his father. And when they went to the Vietnam Wall, his father did the scribe of 2 names. So he asked his dad when he was a kid, who were the 2 names that you did the inscription of? And one was a guy that he had gone through basic training with who was lost in Vietnam, and the other was a guy that his father had fought with in Vietnam that was lost in Vietnam. So this filmmaker went back and found the story of these 2 soldiers and made a film about them called My Father's Vietnam. And it was basically a documentary just telling the story of 2 guys who had been drafted into Vietnam and sent over and didn't come home. One of them was named Ring Bailey. And they interview Ring Bailey's brother-in-law in the documentary. His name was Rick Carlson from Burlington, Vermont. And Rick Carlson says in the documentary he's talking about Ring Bailey. And when Ring Bailey, who was his brother-in-law and best friend, went over to Vietnam, Rick had given him a small race car because Ring and Rick had a goal that when Ring came back from the war, they were going to engineer a car that would be able to make the Indianapolis 500. So I saw this and thought, holy cow. I looked up Rick Carlson's information, called him on the telephone and said, hey, I saw the documentary about Ring Bailey, your brother-in-law. And the guy said, yeah. And I said, I happen to work the broadcast for the Indianapolis 500. And I know that you had talked about your aspiration for Ring and you to be able to be part of the Indy 500. Have you ever been to the 500? And he said, I have not. However, Ring was married to my sister, so every year I watched the Indy 500 at my sister's house in his honor. And I said, well, how would you like to watch it this year at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway as my spotter? And so Rick Carlson brought his son, and he brought the car because it was ultimately returned to him when Ring Bailey was returned home, and he still had the car. And he came out, and it was absolutely a treasure to me. Rick was and still is such a dear friend, a great guy. We had a wonderful time. He got to go to the Andretti party. He got to take a picture of Mario holding the race car. He got to take a picture of the race car on the bricks. And he lives in Burlington, Vermont. And when I was last traveling in that area, I went through Burlington, met up with Rick. He returned the favor by showing me where he lives and the things that are important to him in Burlington. And we have been friends ever since. And those are the little things that make life great. But Vermont is absolutely gorgeous. And if the people there are anything like Rick, then it is absolutely a perfect place that you want to visit because it was beautiful. And so too is Rick and his son David and the honor of Ring Bailey. Very, very, very cool guy. We'll come back. We'll talk about what happened Indiana, Purdue, and Pacers last night. John joins us as well. I'm sure this is like an easily found answer, and in fact, I think he's still doing stuff. But I've always kind of wondered what happened to Andrew Ridgely for a long time there, the other half of Wham. Like, is he just – I think he still does stuff, but you want to talk about a duo where one went on to, just massive worldwide stardom and the other is like the answer to a trivia question. There you go, right? Last night in Madison, Wisconsin, and last night in Iowa City, Iowa, and last night in Portland, Oregon, you had 3 movies that you'd seen before. Movie number 1, the first of the triple matinee, was Purdue and Iowa. And I mentioned earlier, what Purdue does as well as anybody is they let the game between their 2 big players, and yes, they have other guys that all know their exact role and where their spots are in terms of scoring. But let's be real. This version of Purdue is a Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Wren show, essentially. And they determine the way the game is falling, which way they kind of go with one, and then the other one feeds off of that. And you saw that last night. They established Trey Kaufman-Wren early, and then Braden Smith got it going and got it going in a big way and showed why he is the best point guard in the country. And just a super smart, super savvy player, a great college basketball player. And, yeah, Fletcher Lawyer's there if you need be to hit big shots, but you're not necessarily filtering it through that. You are taking what the defense gives you and then taking even more from when they adjust to it. And you knew going into Iowa that was going to be a difficult game because Iowa is always a tough place to play, and it kind of went the way typically games with Iowa do. Hang around, and they have some players, but you can kind of wear them down or you can stick with – and what Purdue does is just stick with what's working for them. And they are very, very smart at figuring out what's going to work, and they have a system, and it's a brilliant system. Then the second part of the triple matinee was Indiana and Wisconsin. Now, this particular movie, if you got up to go get popcorn and use the restroom and you say, let me know what I miss. When you come back to your seat, and you're like, where'd you go? I told you to stay here to let me know what I missed. Oh, I'm sorry. I left. Why? Because the movie's over. What do you mean? The main character got killed in the first scene. Okay. The Indiana in that game got down 20 early and it was over. Now, you can give them credit for they rallied back and got it within like the 10 to 12 range. And yes, there is something to be said for when a team comes out, and sometimes that happens, where a team comes out blistering hot and the roof just caves in. But Indiana did nothing, seemingly, to rotate defensively and get out on the perimeter and disrupt Wisconsin's shots. Indiana did nothing, seemingly, offensively to rotate around to get their own shooters open-looking shots. And they completely ignored the one thing that should have been their bread and butter, which was Umar Ballo. He got 3 shots. He's bigger than anybody on the floor. He does have good touch. I realize that you are still figuring out because it looks like they are a better team when they go with 1 big down low as opposed to 2. And Malik Renew is coming off injury, and I don't mean this as an ill will towards the guy, but it looks right now like he is a player who has been a very, very good player for Indiana. But since the injury, there is definitely a regression there, which is unfortunate, but reality, at least as of now. The big thing to me for Indiana is this. This is not sustainable. And I don't mean this year, I mean at all. You have, during timeouts, and I realize I'm watching on television, but most games when you watch, when a team is not playing well or they're missing assignments or whatever else and there's a timeout called, you look at the coach and he's immediately reaching behind him and he's getting a dry erase board or a clipboard and he's rallying guys around him in a half semicircle and he's looking at him individually one-to-one, and then he gets out his clipboard and he's designing a play or he's showing something or he's teaching something that missed. I'm only seeing what TV is showing me, but I know I'm not alone in this. Most of the times they show Mike Woodson, he's just standing there. And there's almost like this weird infighting friction amongst the roster. Some guys are getting a thing of water. Some guys are kind of walking around. Some guys are chirping at their teammate over the fact that they missed him on a look or a shot. It just looks very strange. And the one player, I mean, Trey Galloway's been there for 100 years, right? And yet, like, he doesn't seem to be necessarily a necessarily vocal leader, but Luke Goody, who's been there for 5 months, he's the one that seemingly more often than not is trying to tell people what to do or get people in the right direction. It looks literally like there is no direction and no game plan. And I don't know Mike Woodson. I don't mean that as a personal attack on Mike Woodson, other than to say it looks to me like not only does he look totally incredulous when things aren't going well, he basically says as much after the game. Well, I just got to get these guys to play better. Okay?
I got to get these guys better prepared.
Right. And what are you going to do about that? Well, that's my job. And that's it, right? And it's like, well, what is the design here? But it also looks like, and Rafael Davis said this, like it looks like there is turmoil amongst the group. It looks like there's no cohesiveness, there's no cohesion, there's nothing. This is not sustainable, and I think now we know that Indiana is going to make a change. There's no way, no matter how influential people are, there's no way that they can bring this back for another year because it's not circling the drain now. It has slipped through it, number one. And number two, now you've got Michigan coming in with Dusty May. If you think it was bad when the students started changing, college students aren't dumb, okay? They're not dumb. They know the girlfriends of the point guard on the other team. They know what class a guy's getting a C- in. They do all that homework and research. You think the Indiana student body doesn't look at Indiana, who's lost like 6 of 8 or 7 of 8 or whatever it might be, and just got blown out by Wisconsin, after they sat there and chanted Fire Woodson beforehand, before they went on the road. And, yeah, they did look okay against Purdue. I mean, they gave good effort. I'll grant you that. But they still – everybody knew what was going to happen in Wisconsin. And it wasn't the fact they lost the game. It wasn't the fact that Wisconsin started out hot. It was the fact that Indiana looked like they didn't have any idea how to make adjustment, and it looked like they had no leadership within their roster itself because guys look like they're not talking, not communicating, infighting, whatever it may be. And students aren't dumb. They know, hey, you know what? The guy that's getting ready to come in and coach against us this week, the next home game where we chanted up from the balconies, Fire Woodson, and then people did the same thing at Welsh Ryan when Northwestern beat them. The next guy that's coming to coach is from 40 minutes outside of Bloomington and was a student manager here, and he's got a name that's fun to spell out and chant. You think that's not going to happen? It was, I believe, February 11th of 2006 when Indiana had lost, I think 3 or 5 or 4 or 5 with Iowa coming into town. Mike Davis was starting to feel the heat. Iowa is bringing Steve Alford, who'd played in Indiana, a legend in Indiana, a rising young coach at that time that many people thought should be the head coach at Indiana, and Mike Davis the day that they were playing that game. And Mike Davis, who I think deserves all the credit in the world for the things that he put up with in Indiana. I've got tons of respect for Mike Davis. But Mike Davis was a little bit more self-aware, and maybe he was sick. Maybe he had a 24-hour bug. But he didn't coach that game because there already were starting to become boos and chants and all kinds of question marks about his long-term situation. And nobody wanted him to be in that position. Is that going to happen? We'll see. And then the Pacers, we talked about that, what happened last night. Appreciate everybody listening today. Appreciate Debbie Antonelli for joining the program. Appreciate Julie Rolash for joining the program, Dustin Dopirak, and we will be back with you. John is up next. We'll be back with you at noon tomorrow, and we thank you for listening to Query & Company.